Dear comrades, dear colleagues, dear friends, please let's start now. Take your seats. We also are expecting some people more, but I think we should start now, not to lose too much time. Okay. I will now speak in English, in German. And please look to the cabins. You can find the numbers for your languages. Okay. Ja. Die meisten haben jetzt ihre.
Most people have now put their headphones on, those who don't understand German.
Herzlich willkommen.
So, welcome to our conference, which is a joint conference, GUI-NGL, the United Left and Nordic Green, and the Left. And we're working together with TNI, the Transnational Institute, so it's a joint conference. I also like to welcome Susan George, the President Chair of TNI. And it's good to be able to organize a joint conference. Just 2 weeks ago in Strasbourg, we launched a common initiative focusing on the immunity of transnational businesses. And often they disregard human rights, employees' rights, and other rights, human rights and so forth. So they can break all these laws with impunity. And this time we're going to talk about TTIP. And it's a pleasure to be able to welcome you all here. And I would also like to welcome all of those activists who for several weeks, several months now have been dealing with the TTIP issues and to give it the public profile that it deserves, and to organize resistance. So I'll welcome the activists, the unionists, the NGO representatives from Europe, from Australia, from Canada, and from the USA. So welcome to you all. I would also like to welcome the MPs from the various national parliaments. And I'd also like to say thank you for the commitment of various members of parliament at national level. They've made quite a bit of progress in places. The French parliament, for example, recently took a decision, a resolution, to express its doubts about CETA and the courts. Now, there are lots of strikes in Belgium, which have meant that many of you have had trouble coming here, but still the aim of the strikes is more important than the inconvenience that we've been subjected to. I'd like to express our solidarity with the people who are on strikes in Belgium and in other countries. There are a number of strikes underway in a range of countries, and we would like to express our support for them. It's important that the ruling elites see clearly that there is resistance to their policies, and this is our conference today is an expression of that, of course, as well. I would like to wish you all the best in the struggles which will take place in Belgium and in other countries next week. And we really need to make the most of this lead up to the Christmas New Year period to make our positions known publicly and to rattle a few cages. Now, Cecilia Malmström and Michael Froman, her opposite number in the USA, are talking about TTIP in the USA today. And today in Brussels, we're congratulating Mr. Juncker at 1 p.m. We're going to give him a best wishes for his birthday. There will be a petition will be handed over to him against TTIP with over 1 million signatures. We've been invited to take part in that, and we're going to make some time available for that. Sigmar Gabriel, the Vice Chancellor of Germany, is in the Parliament here today as well, and he's going to try to talk about his version of TTIP to the German representatives here in the European Parliament, and we need to make our position clear to him as well and get him to reflect on his position. I'd also like to draw your attention to the fact that in January the Latvian presidency will begin. Last week I met the Latvian government representatives and was able to establish there that the Latvian government should use its presidency to deal with the falsehoods that are being disseminated about TTIP. And this is in the interest of TTIP, in the interest of the Latvian economy as well. And it's also shameful that the European Citizens Initiative was rejected. And I'm glad to see that the organisers of that have not given up the struggle, that they are gathering signatures for another referendum. My party, GUI NGL, was from the outset against this sort of trade agreement. We've always said that we are in favour of free trade. But free trade is something we're critical of. That concerns CETA, TISA, and also the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And going even further back, there's the ACP negotiations and the EPAs, the Economic Partnership Agreements. There's a similar problem. It's not only about trade, it's about democracy, it's about social rights, it's about the environment, cultural diversity, and the question of how we want to live together. And looking at into the room here and looking at the various activities that have been carried out in the past few months, we're now far more numerous than we were 1 year ago. But we can further deepen our cooperation. We need more cooperation between activists, NGOs, academics, members of Parliament at the various levels. We need this broad coalition, not only in the fight against TTIP, but in general, to tackle the neoliberal agenda and to get our alternative worldview through. This conference is a contribution to the deepening of this cooperation, and this conference reminds me of the way in which the internal market directive and the way an attempt was made to get further Europe-wide coordination and to cooperate to work out which strategies, which tactics the activities should pursue in common. Then we brought ACTA down, we brought the MIE down, and I'm convinced that we can bring the TTIP down as well. That said, I wish you and us all the best for today's conference, and I'll hand the floor now to Susan George.
Thank you very much indeed, Gabi, and the whole GUE NGL group. I'm extremely happy to be with you all this morning and honored to open this conference with Gabi. It's an extremely important conference, and I want to make my own biases perfectly clear at the outset. The TTIP is a very dangerous animal. It's an animal that doesn't deserve to be on the list of protected species. I'm not here to say we should argue about this or that aspect of the TTIP, that we should get rid of maybe ISDS and then all will be well, or that we should throw out something else. No, that's not the point. This is a treaty that has to be refused absolutely and entirely. It has been under careful preparation by US and European transnational corporations for the last 20 years. They started with the transatlantic business dialogue. This has gone through many stages, but the corporations know exactly what they want, and they have made it very clear to their political representatives and negotiators. So that's where we are. It is the people versus the transnational corporations on both sides of the Atlantic. But before going any further, I want to make the most important point absolutely clear, because we're going to have a lot of bad news today, because the TTIP is full of bad news. But this is a fight that we can win. I'm absolutely convinced of that, because it is a terrible and a terrifying text, and as soon as people learn about it, there is something for practically everyone to hate and to fear. So it's something we can win if we can make it public enough. So let's have a quick look at those that this treaty is going to offend and the people it will affect. First of all, and possibly the most important in the longer term, is the question of the climate. It's a question of simply life on Earth, because if the TTIP goes through, then it doesn't much matter what happens at the COP21 at the end of the year in Paris, because TTIP supports the major oil companies, gas companies, coal companies. It will encourage fracking. It will give, and I quote, unrestricted access to raw materials, which means what's in the ground and what's above it. The same goes for the tar sands in Canada. We'll hear more about that. And anyone who seeks to protect the climate and the natural world has to be against this treaty. Second, if the tariffs are lowered drastically on the one area where they still exist, and that is in the agricultural sector, Europe is likely to lose about 2 million of its 13 million farmers. We haven't time to go into detail on all of this, at least not in this opening section, but all the farmers, particularly smaller farmers, should be against the TTIP. Then we have workers. Workers have to be worried. Think of the case that was brought to arbitration by Veolia against Egypt, because Egypt had the nerve to raise the minimum wage, and Veolia brought a lawsuit against it in a private arbitration tribunal, because it is going to, raising the minimum wage will harm their present and their future profits. So we don't have the outcome of that case yet, but certainly this is the kind of things that workers can expect if there is any favorable new legislation on work. There are going to be numerous public services under pressure to privatize, and I think we can make the general category of individuals and families who will all be affected by lowering the standards for health, the sanitary standards, the food standards. Many U.S. officials have officially stated that if they can't deregulate standards and get rid of the precautionary principle, which is one of the things that protects us in Europe, there's no point in negotiating. They've been extremely clear about this, and they want to take over the business of regulation themselves in something that will be called the Regulatory Cooperation Council, and there will be a seminar on that this afternoon. But we all know about chlorine chicken, about hormone-fed beef, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. There will be many other regulations that they will want to reduce, saying that they are excessive and that they are costing them billions every year, and so it doesn't matter what happens to the public. The point is to benefit the transnationals once more. And another category are elected representatives. Many of you here today, MEPs, but also people at the municipal level. They've got to hate this treaty because it will cause them to lose a great deal of influence and freedom of choice, not just in regulation, but in government procurement. Many municipalities will be obliged to open up public contracts. They will not be able to reserve work for local people or for local companies, and small and medium businesses are going to lose out. It's going to be expensive, very expensive, not just through ISDS, although the investor-to-state dispute resolution system will be extremely costly to governments and taxpayers. Already, under a great many bilateral treaties, there are about 127 cases that we can count that have been brought against European countries, members of the Union, mostly in Central and Eastern Europe, to the point that in only 14 cases, because we don't have complete figures, we don't know really how much has been awarded to the corporations, but we do know that for 14 cases the companies have taken $3.5 billion in compensation. And we know that there will be an explosion of cases if the TTIP passes. So that doesn't leave many people out. The Commission is using its own contracted think tank to provide a report, and it is stressing jobs and growth. This is always the argument. However, what would that mean? Even with the most optimistic scenario of this think tank, the CEPR, what would happen for Europeans? What is favorable? Even under the most optimistic scenario, it's a cup of coffee per week and per European in 2027. So over the next 12 years, the cup of coffee may fill up gradually, but that's all you can expect as Europeans. And another scenario written by a man called Jeronim Capaldo, using another set of parameters for estimation, the United Nations method for calculating, he says that there would be a massive loss of jobs, which would be the same thing as with NAFTA between the US, Canada, and Mexico. So this isn't a fight between European people and American people. It's not a fight between citizens. Many of our friends in the United States are struggling hard against this terrible treaty. What it is a fight that if we lose, it's citizens who lose and the corporations that win. But we can win if we use what we call the Dracula strategy. You know, if you expose the vampire to the light, the vampire cannot stand the light of day, and it shrivels up and it dies. And the idea is to make the content of the TTIP absolutely clear to all Europeans, all in your own languages, and to remember Dracula. And we are giving Dracula a first act today when we go to present Mr. Juncker with his birthday present, which will be the first 1 million signatures against this treaty. But we're not stopping there. We are going on, hoping that every single European country will meet its quota and that we can have millions more voices raised against this very dangerous animal, which I think and believe we can drive to extinction. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you, Susan George. So now that we've both opened the conference today, I'd like to start with our first round. I'll ask the MC, the moderator, to come forward. Now, I hope you don't take offense here. Susan George and 2 other participants here will have to go to a press conference at 10:30, so don't take that the wrong way. So we're going to have to leave the room then. We apologize for that. So I now I'll now make way for my colleague here.
You're going to sit down. Good morning, I'm Brian Maguire. We're going to begin with our first session this morning. What's at stake? Some housekeeping rules, first of all. You're all invited to speak in your native language. We have an excellent team of translators with us here. Please speak slowly and clearly to give them an opportunity to interpret exactly. For our panelists also, we have a very complicated system to stop and go. When you see this, it's 1 minute left, and when you see this, it's stop. Anybody who goes beyond this has to buy Jean-Claude Juncker a birthday drink this afternoon. So, our first speaker today is Cécile Toubeau from Transport and Environment. You have 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to speak to you this morning. TNE are part of the European Commission TTIP Advisory Group. When we were asked to join this group in early 2014, we had an internal discussion and agreed that joining this group would never gag us or stop us from ever communicating or discussing the issues of TTIP that we would be privy to, or the information that we would be privy to, which is why when we had to review the terms and conditions of the group, we ensured that being able to consult with our stakeholders whom we represent was part of the discussion that we could have. So this morning, I see you all as my stakeholders. As such, I can give you as much information as I have in the advisory group. The negotiations are currently, let's say, paused while Malmström goes to the US and meets her counterpart, and are due to start again in February. The update I'm going to give you is based on the October 2014 negotiations, and I hope I can do it in 7 minutes. It's quite a lot to go through. The negotiations are broken down into 3 main pillars, and then each pillar has its own subsection. So what I'd like to do is focus on some of the main points from the previous negotiations. So in Pillar 1 you find market access, and You know, I don't want to sound like the negotiating team that all look at you at each advisory sort of summary and say, you know, some of the negotiations were good, but in other areas, you know, we're not progressing. So I'd like to give you a little bit more detail. In the services and investment area, they are continuing to discuss all sectors, including environment, distribution, postal, business, health, education, energy, and transport. They've had very long discussions on the telecoms industry and issues of e-commerce. However, on most points, they don't seem to have any kind of agreement. They can't agree on the methodology as to how you would start to even begin the negotiations. And there is indication that without strong political indication that this has to be achieved, the negotiators at a technical level are finding it difficult to continue. On issues of sort of job transfer within the services industry, so what is typically known as the WTO Mode 4, they have had some discussions, but again are not agreeing. So I would say sort of, and another comment is on anything on public services, they're refusing to make any kind of commitment that they would move forward, which is difficult because they include, you know, what I would see as a public service like health and education. They are discussing, but they haven't defined that as part of the public services that they're not discussing. So you know, as an outsider, I find it difficult to understand what it is that they're defining as a public service, which they don't seem to be able to agree on. On agricultural market access, they're mainly discussing non-tariff agricultural issues with a strong focus on olives and wine. On the second pillar of regulatory component, this is actually quite a long list, so I'm sort of just going to give you some of the main points. On sanitary and phytosanitary issues, only the EU has a proposed text. The US still has nothing to offer, so the negotiations are based on what the EU is pushing forward. On regulatory coherence, the US has made a proposal which the EU has rejected on the basis that the US would like to see the EU make some fundamental reforms, which the EU has just said quite plainly this is not something that we're going to be able to do under TTIP, particularly because the US proposal would only bind the US to its federal rulemaking, while it would bind the EU to its federal and national rulemaking. So obviously you can see that there's an imbalance there. On the technical barriers to trade, the US is particularly pushing on changes within the EU system, looking at standards and conformity assessments. And again, the EU has pushed back on that and said that it's unacceptable for them to be able to change anything under TTIP. So as such, those negotiations are not going that well either. On vehicles, there's actually quite a lot of move for looking at regulatory equivalences on safety issues. But I would say that those moves are very small. They're on very small elements of safety. They're not really tackling the big, difficult negotiations such as crash testing. But I would say that out of all of those chapters that are in part of this pillar, maybe vehicles is the one that's advancing the most. In the chemicals section, they've agreed to undertake 2 pilot projects, prioritization and assessment of substances, and another one on classification and labeling. However, the process is limited as they've really just started this and they expect more in 2015. On pharmaceuticals and on medical devices, they've essentially agreed to participate in and observe in each other's methods. So there's something called good manufacturing practices, with which both regions implement slightly differently, and they've invited each other to sort of view and understand. So at this stage, I'd say it's still they're not really negotiating anything apart from just understanding each other's processes. On the cosmetics area, the EU is really focused on the safety assessment method, while the US hasn't proposed anything. And on pesticides, they are trying to set maximum residue limits. On the third pillar, which looks at rules, the energy and raw materials chapter continues to be quite contentious. The US doesn't particularly want to see a dedicated or committed energy-specific chapter. That doesn't mean that they don't want to have energy as part of the broader TTIP, but they would rather have it divided up in areas such as market access or transportation. So far, the main focus has been on access to fossil fuels. However, apparently in 2015 they're going to start looking at issues like energy efficiency and renewable energies. The other areas in the third pillar, I can update you if you want to come and find me. I just want to go to one very specific one, and that's on geographical indicators. The EU has, in the last round, provided an economic evidence underpinning why this protection is in place. And this was something that was actually included in the sort of negotiation summary. The US remains non-committal to engage on this issue as it has on previous rounds. So anything to do with GIs continues to be off the table. Just one quick last point. I would say that there's a lot for Malmström and Froman to be discussing this week, because my assessment of the negotiations is they're not going terribly well. There seems to be a political willingness to sort this out, and the trade negotiators and the trade pushers are really pushing this issue, but I get a sense that the regulators are more aware of what they're dealing with and understand that it's almost impossible to try and merge this, these two areas.
Cecile, thank you. No drinks for Jean-Claude yet. Helmut Scholz will respond on behalf of parliamentarians. After each speaker, a parliamentarian will give a short response as well. So, Helmut, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
3 minutes? Even less than I expected. It is very motivating to see so many people in this room who are determined to challenge against the powerful forces behind the TTIP, TISA and CETA. And as I would say, for all the three mentioned, these negotiations, 2015 will be a crucial year. For CETA, negotiations have concluded. And together with the Singapore agreement, it will be the first test case of whether the European Parliament will be willing to ratify agreements containing the investor-state dispute settlement mechanism, ISDS. In the next days before Christmas break, the European Commission has announced to publish their analysis of the ISDS consultations conducted earlier this year. You remember, from April to June this year. Like so many of you, I also have contributed to a response to the questions raised, and I am very curious to see how the Commission is dealing with our legitimate arguments. For TISA and TTIP, 2015 will be the year when negotiations enter the next phase. After many rounds of exploring the territory, negotiators should now produce consolidated text on a majority of issues, and just as Cecilia has spoken about that. In the first week of February, there will be the 8th round of the negotiations in Washington. This House will produce an interim report on the negotiations, while the Trade Committee and Rapporteur Bernd Lange from the S&D Group will take the lead on this report. Many other committees are called upon to submit an opinion to this report. This working process will start in January, and the vote is scheduled for April or May. So, just picking up the words of Susan George, time is running. For our movement, the report has high importance. Is there a majority in the newly elected European Parliament against ISDS? Will commitments on public services be rejected? Will there be a clear signal to the negotiators that neither our democratic procedures to legislate nor our values and standards in labour, social and environmental achievements are for sale? We will need stamina in the struggle, but the first quarter of 2015 will consist of strong activity towards the members of the European Parliament and the constituencies. We shouldn't expect that the other side is dormant. After the G20 summit in Brisbane, we could observe a concerted action of European Commission, US government and many European leaders like Chancellor Merkel to advertise and lobby for TTIP. Critics of ISDS in CETA, like Minister Gabriel from Germany, were successfully convinced to change their mind. Commissioner Malmström is trying to silence the criticism concerning the transparency debates and a new initiative on this issue, but then, when it comes to consolidated text, there will be no transparency. What they produce for February will still be made available only in the reading rooms, and I am one of the members of the European Parliament who have access, so you can blame and ask me what I am reading. The public will see nothing. Let us work together to end the secrecy that is ingrained in TTIP. Thank you.
Thank you, Helmut. So, next we have Scott Harris from the excellently named Council of Canadians. Right after that we're going to have a short video as well, but first of all, Scott Harris. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you very much, and it's a real honor to be here, and exciting to see a country where these issues are debated, because this debate is not happening in Canada to the same extent that it's happening in Europe. So I've been asked to talk for 5 minutes about investor-state dispute settlement, ISDS. And I speak on this from the Canadian perspective of spending 20 years sleeping with the elephant through the North American Free Trade Agreement with the United States. And Europeans, based on our experience, have good reason to be worried about what investor-state with the United States would mean for your social programs and for your government policies. Under Chapter 11, which is the investment chapter of NAFTA, the Canadian government has been challenged 35 times for a series of measures. Canadian taxpayers have already paid out over $170 million in suits, and we face billions more currently. So we've seen the impact of ISDS on a number of fronts. So the first thing I want to say is what ISDS is really about, because proponents will say that investment protection in these trade agreements is about encouraging investment flows, providing a stable investment climate. And of course, both of those things are not the real aim behind ISDS. ISDS is about restricting the space that governments have to create policy that puts the public interest ahead of the corporate interest. There is practically no government measure that could not potentially impact corporate investment. And so you can see that when that is the goal of an investment protection clause, it will impact everything a government will do. And in Canada, the impact has been, there's been essentially no new social programs put in place in Canada since NAFTA was introduced in 1994. The second argument that you'll hear about ISDS is that it creates a level playing field for foreign investors. It provides them with the same level of protections that domestic corporations enjoy. In fact, the opposite is true. ISDS, because only foreign corporations can access it, actually elevates foreign corporations above domestic ones. In the case of Canada, we see how corporations use this. There is a Calgary, Alberta, Canada-based corporation called Lone Pine that has actually used a Delaware, United States-based subsidiary to challenge a ban in the province of Quebec over fracking. So obviously, Lone Pine saw that ISDS provides better protection for foreign corporations than domestic ones, and used their foreign corporation to sue Canada for $250 million. This raises the point of the idea that proponents will argue that ISDS investment protection does not infringe on a state's right to regulate, that the right to regulate is protected. And our experience with NAFTA shows, in fact, the opposite is true. If a province cannot, in response to concerns about water safety, in response to very legitimate concerns from the public around a process like hydraulic fracturing, cannot put in place a moratorium to investigate it further, then obviously the right to protect, or the right to regulate, is not protected by these agreements and is actually in the crosshairs. And we see this again and again. We see this in the challenge against Australians' moves to limit tobacco use. We see this in Germany's phase out of nuclear energy. We see this again and again, investor state. And more what we're seeing is the use of ISDS, the approach from corporations and law firms that now specialize in investment treaties, that the use of ISDS has actually become a bit of an industry. For the first 4 decades that ISDS was in existence, there were only about 50 challenges launched. And in each of the last 3 years, more than 50 challenges have been made in each of those years. So we're seeing exponential growth in the use of ISDS to challenge government measures, and an entire industry, largely US-based, growing around that. The Final argument that you'll hear from proponents of ISDS is that you cannot force a government to not regulate. You can't force them to change laws. You can only offer financial compensation. And while this is technically true, our experience with Chapter 11 shows that governments sometimes will, in the course of a challenge, change their laws. So one of the earliest challenges under NAFTA was Ethel Corporation. The Canadian government had put in place a ban on a toxic additive for gasoline. And as part of the settlement, the Canadian government voluntarily withdrew its ban, allowing a neurotoxin to enter the Canadian environment, and also paid the corporation $13 million in penalties and issued a public apology for having the temerity to introduce a law protecting Canadians and the environment. In addition to that, what you see is a policy chill created, whereby the threat of a challenge or concerns about challenges actually stop governments from introducing laws to begin with, or regulations to begin with. So there's the concern about the impact it will have on laws that are passed, but an equal concern for citizens should be what are the laws that never make it to the table because of concerns around future challenges that might emerge. So, for instance, in Canada, we're seeing another province, New Brunswick, that is looking at a fracking moratorium that is being warned because of the Quebec case around how they implement that policy on the provincial level. And this was probably stated best by a Canadian official about 5 years after the introduction of NAFTA, who said, "I've seen letters from the New York and DC law firms coming up to the Canadian government on virtually every new environmental regulation. Virtually all of the new initiatives were targeted, and most of them never saw the light of day." So this is a real problem for governments who are looking to respond to public concerns. So I'll close by saying, giving a bit of a pitch. I know that in Europe, the real concern is around the agreement with the United States, and as I've said, you have very good reasons to be concerned. But I'd ask you to not lose sight of the fact that because of the incredible integration between the corporate sector in Canada and the United States, largely as a result of NAFTA, if you want to avoid ISDS with the United States, you also have to avoid ISDS with Canada. So while you're working on TTIP, I would encourage you as well to always add the words "and CETA" to your opposition to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you very much. Now we're going to have a short video, 5 minutes, with from Thomas Vance from National Australian University. Are you ready to go with the video? Run, Paul. Okay, after this we'll have our parliamentarian response, and then we'll have the opportunity for 3 sets of questions as well. Here we go. Okay, Anne-Marie, would you like to respond, and then we come back to the video just after this as well. Can we have the lights back up for a moment, please? Okay, can we have the lights back up? Okay. While we wait for the lights to come back up, Anne-Marie Mina, MEP, will give a short response to this as well. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Okay, I'll try to feel my way around my notes here. I'm Annemarie Mineur. I'm a Dutch MEP for the Socialist Party, and I'm the spokesperson on the Canadian Free Trade Agreement in the GUE group. ISDS is, I think, a very worrying topic. It's, as Susan George already mentioned in an excellent speech, what is the transnational institutions are trying to do is get rid of the precautionary principle, and in a broader sense, get rid of public influence on policy making. That's either going to happen through ISDS or it's going to happen through regulatory cooperation, and it's worrying. Cecilia Malmström sort of hints that she might give up ISDS through TTIP, the American Free Trade Agreement, but she won't give up ISDS in the CETA agreement. So, as Scott pointed out rightly, it's going to happen one way or another unless we stop the CETA agreement, actually also the Singapore agreement and the TTIP agreement. ISDS is out there. It's already present in 2,700 agreements in existence right now. And it's a toy, I should say, of both transnational institutions and lawyers. Actually, there's an excellent, really recommendable paper by Corporate Europe Observatory that my next-door neighbour here is a member of. It's called Profiting from Injustice, and they've really figured out where what the influence is of these arbitration committees. And just to name a few staggering figures, just 3 top law firms are involved in many of the cases. 15 arbitrators have as much as 55% of all the cases. And actually 74% of editorial boards of journals on investment law are controlled by investment lawyers. These people go for especially countries in crisis, which is something I find really worrying. The resistance against ISDS is growing. For a long time, only Germany was actually opposing ISDS. I understand that Sigmar Gabriel is having a bit of a fight in his own political party, as are other political parties. Sorry, no, well, never mind. In my own country, a resolution was accepted saying that the Netherlands oppose ISDS. There's a bit of confusion about that because it's supposed to be a mistake. Thanks. But France has actually accepted a resolution really opposing ISDS, and that's good news because just one country has to oppose for this to stagger, not so much in Parliament as in the Council. So there is hope, but there is also a great need for fighting. And, well, another reason to worry is the regulatory cooperation, but that will be discussed later today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Shall we try the video one more time? Or not? Okay. Well, our technical team worked that out. We have the opportunity for 3 questions. You can address them to the panel. Please identify yourself and your organisation. Remember to speak clearly and concisely for the translators. Make your question short to give the opportunity to the panellists to respond. There's 5 minutes allocated for each question set, so we have 15 minutes in total for questions now. We'll try for final time for the video after the questions as well. So if anyone would like to address the panel, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. Please state your name and your organisation. Thank you. Just press the red button beside you.
Kan ik het Nederlands spreken?
Can I speak Dutch? My name is Michel van Horne. I'm the coordinator of the left-wing ecological forum. Are there essential differences between the CETA accord with Canada and the TTIP? Second question concerns the approval procedure of the treaties. Does that have to go through the national parliaments? In Belgium, that would mean that there would be several parliaments that would have to approve it, and that would increase the chance of it being blocked. And that would strengthen our arm as citizens.
Anne-Marie, do you want to take this first?
Yes, certainly. There are certainly essential differences between CETA and TTIP. It's a sort of Christmas lightning we're having here. It's wonderful. CETA is sort of finished. The United States are still being negotiated. There are differences in the extent to which ISDS is progressing, but also regulatory cooperation. There are also differences in the way products are handled. Animal rights, for instance, is an issue which is quite different. So, yes, there are differences, but essentially, it's being either, as we say in Holland, of je door de kat of door de hond gebeten wordt, it's just as bad. Being bitten by the cat or by the dog, it's pretty bad. About the way the agreements are supposed to be approved, there is a discussion about the agreements being mixed agreements. That is, whether the national parliaments as well as the European Parliament has a say in it, or whether the European Parliament can decide by itself. Ms. Malmström, her predecessor Karel de Gucht has started a case in court about the Singapore agreement because he wants to find out if, or he wanted to find out, and Malmström has taken over, whether the the law, whether the treaty we're talking about allows for just a European Parliament a mandate on this, or whether we need to ask the national parliaments. But as soon as one of the ministers, one of the national governments disagrees, then it will stop as well. So there are ways around this. If there's one, as happened in France, there is one resolution accepted saying we don't want these agreements, then the discussion about the mixed agreements, well, is void, basically.
Okay, let me bring in Scott. Do you want to answer this?
I think all that I would really add, I mean, obviously every agreement is different. There's been discussions that TTIP or CETA will act as a blueprint for TTIP, and of course the consultations on TTIP's ISDS and investment chapter used the actual, at that time, draft text of CETA as the basis for the consultation. So there'll be parallels in some of the chapters, and other ones, the scope and scale of the agreements will be different. Of course, there's no text that's public yet for TTIP, so at this point it's hard to say just how much overlap there'll be between the two of them, but there'll definitely be a relationship between them, especially when it comes to the investment protections. Okay, thank you, Scott. Quick response from Helmut also, and then we go to the next question.
Just shortly, the Commission is deciding if it is a mixed agreement or not a mixed agreement. So if the Commission comes to the conclusion that CETA is a mixed agreement, and I guess the Commission will say it is a mixed agreement according to the big public interest on that, then it has to go into two layer procedures. It means first the European level has to decide, including the European Parliament, and then it will go to the national level, to the national parliament, and it has then to be ratified at the national parliaments. But we have to understand that the Parliament can only say yes or no. There will be no negotiation on any chapter or any substance on that agreement because it is finally concluded. That means the pressure must be clear that we want to have it as a mixed agreement. It must be also a request from the national parliamentarian level towards the governments who are deciding in the Council on the proposal of the Commission, mixed agreement or not. And secondly, then, of course, the pressure to the parliamentarian levels to deal with the contents, to check, to prove, to make transparent what the agreement is about, and then to have a clear ratification process. Thank you.
Thank you, Helmut. We need to catch up some time, so we'll have one more question in this section, and then we'll go to Pablo Sanchez. Another question? Just here.
Hola, buenos días. Si puedo hacer una pregunta en...
Morning.
in Spanish, Carlos Hijo, from the Catalonia Against the TTIP conference. Question is for Mr. Scott from Canada. What about massive extractions of environmental, for example, bituminous earths in Canada, extractions there? Is there some sort of internal market vis-à-vis NAFTA on the export of all of this? And at the same time, what about hydrocarbon market? How would that be affected by CETA signing with Europe? What amounts are exported, and how is this bituminous earth exported? Thank you.
Okay, Scott?
I'm not sure I understood the second part of the question. It might have been the translation, but yeah. So in terms of NAFTA and the tar sands or oil sands, the NAFTA included an energy chapter which includes a provision called proportional sharing, which essentially means that Canada cannot decrease the proportion of energy exports to the United States pretty much under any circumstances. So we're essentially tied in, no matter what's happening to our domestic market and domestic demand, to continue to export oil to the U.S. Practically at this point, all of the oil production in Canada, for all intents and purposes, comes from tar sands in northern Alberta, about 3 hours north of where I live. Yeah, so I mean, we are essentially locked in to a continental energy plan with the United States. Increasingly, the development and export of our resources is becoming continental, and you're continuing to see, even just last week, the Canadian Council for Chief Executives, which is the sort of the business representatives of major corporations in Canada, have been pushing for even greater integration and the creation of made in North America products. You know, there are essentially no Canadian oil corporations, so the vast majority of corporations that are involved in the tar sands in Alberta are from the US, from Europe, or from China. So, you know, we are having massive debates in North America around pipelines that go between the U.S. And Canada, refineries on the Gulf Coast, which are being used for export. There's a big push in Canada to get tar sands to Tidewater because, again, almost all of our exports at this point are going to the U.S. And again, I didn't quite understand the second half of the question, so I apologize.
Okay, quick response from Cecile also, then we're going to go to video.
I just wanted to make a quick comment here on how free trade agreements, when they are still only theoretical, can have real impacts on our current day-to-day legislation. There's a very little known piece of legislation called the Fuel Quality Directive, where the EU was supposed to implement a rule whereby fuels would be given a CO2 value based on their extraction, something which is heavy and difficult to extract, which has a high pollution impact because of the industry, would have a higher value than something which is more clean, let's say, to extract, which would mean that Europe would be able to start making a decision going, okay, our fuel mix will be as clean as possible. There would be market indication as to where the money should go, because that cleaner fuel would be selected by Europe. The Commission was supposed to implement this 4 years ago. We saw a draft proposal some years ago, which was during the CETA negotiation, which caused massive outcry by the Canadians and the Americans, who really want us to be buying these tar sands, the tar sand oils. What we now have is a proposal which is completely watered down, which has lumped in tar sands with a series of other sort of fuel choices, and it means that there is no market incentive to move away from tar sands into other options. And here we are in Europe, and tar sand shipments are starting to arrive in Belgium and in Spain, and you can see the handprints of big Canadian business industries and the Canadian government all over our current, our legislation. We're Europeans. This is our laws that we want for our environmental, greening, and it's a sham. And CETA doesn't exist yet, and here we are. So just a quick aside.
Very good aside. Thank you. Okay, we're going to try for the video one more time. This is Jean-Claude Juncker's birthday message, I believe, yes. Maybe not.
So my name is Professor Thomas Faunce from the Australian National University College of Law, and I've been involved in fighting investor-state dispute settlement in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Australia has recently signed trade agreements with Korea and with China, which include investor-state dispute settlement. So although we had a political party in Australia here, the Labor Party, who issued a policy against signing investor-state dispute settlement in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement and actually agreeing to start withdrawing from Australia's involvement in investment treaties, the current political party who's in power is very conservative and sees these agreements as supporting large multinational corporations, which it sees as one of its major constituencies. Our concern is that the Transatlantic and the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement are gradually doing what the multilateral investment agreement failed to do in the 1990s. So civil society fought that back, but what's happening now is that through these regional agreements, the United States companies in particular are achieving a control over democratic governance which is out of all proportion to their responsibility and their capacity to contribute to a democracy. And in doing this, they're profoundly undermining the confidence of average citizens in the democratic process. And this can only lead to disenchantment and disengagement with the democratic process when people feel that regardless of who they get into power and what legislation is passed, it's going to effectively be blocked by the capacity of these multinational corporations to challenge that legislation on the basis that it undercuts some form of investment. Europe already has the Energy Charter Treaty, which has similar sort of provisions, and these provisions have been put in place and essentially to hold back the next generation of technologies which we hope are going to lead to a sustainable world. My particular interest has been in globalising artificial photosynthesis, which is the capacity to make all roads and houses and bridges on the surface of the earth do photosynthesis better than plants. That means using sunlight to split water as a source of hydrogen and oxygen and to absorb atmospheric nitrogen and CO2. Now, if every house and bridge on the surface of the earth was doing that, it's game over for the corporations because there's distributed local food and fuel and carbon dioxide reduction right across the planet. We can give rights to nature. All sorts of things follow in hopefully issuing in what we hope is the Sustainocene, and we get out of what I call the corporatocene, because it's not really the average person who's stuffing up the planet at the moment. It's these artificial people called corporations. And investor-state dispute settlement is giving these corporations power completely out of proportion to their actual usefulness in the economy. So it's going to lead to some sort of catastrophe unless it's stopped at some point. And I hope that common sense prevails and there's a pullback from this, because it's not, these investor-state provisions are not benefiting any average citizen. They're only benefiting the rich people who are involved with these large corporations. The body of law, so-called law, that these investor arbitrators look at is not connected to any of the great normative systems. It's not connected to human rights law. It's not connected to constitutional law. All the forms of law that citizens have developed over centuries to express their aspirations, it's just connected to an ad hoc, narrowly focused investment law that's sort of made up on a case-by-case basis. It's not really law at all. It's fake law. And turning over the control of the planet, in a sense, through the massive damages that can potentially be awarded through this system would be a disastrous step, particularly at this sort of fragile moment in humanity. So my message is keep fighting against investor-state dispute settlement in the Transatlantic Agreement. We'll keep fighting against it down here. I think it's a fight we'll win. We won this fight against investor-state dispute settlement on a multilateral basis in the 1990s, and hopefully we'll win it again. Keep fighting.
Thank you for that, Thomas. I'm sure Thomas is watching actually in Australia currently. One of our parliamentarians would like a short intervention, and then we will continue with the next section. The floor is yours, sir.
Δεν θέλω να κάνω ερώτηση.
It's not a question. I just want to speak for a minute. The system that is run today by the G8/G20 has decided to spread its tentacles all over the world. That's the first thing I wanted to say. One of those tentacles is the system we're talking about today. And I would like to congratulate all of the people that spoke, as well as everyone that is reacting against this. However, we need to convince the peoples. In my humble opinion, the only way to do this is the following. The US has a trade agreement with each one of our countries. US and France, US and the UK, US and Italy, and so on. With every European country. Why do we need, on top of those agreements, this one? Aren't they happy with the bilateral ones? So, the answer is no. They're obviously not happy with the bilateral agreements, and they want to have a more systematic agreement that will bind peoples even further. In the same way that they have NATO, they want to create a trade NATO. I had called this a trade NATO from the outset, and quite a few colleagues told me that Mrs. Clinton, that had started this, had also called it a trade NATO. But, of course, in the face of the uproar that caused, they renamed it. So, what we have to do is convince the peoples. We have to reveal the truth, the fact that this is just one of the many tentacles of this system that aims to subjugate peoples. Thank you very much.
Mr. Glezos, thank you for that. Helmut Schulz would like a quick response also.
Thank you. Manolis is fully right, but I want to be maybe even more precise. It is not the question of concluding a trade agreement or an investment agreement. There are a lot of agreements. It's the question of establishing a new transatlantic market. And the question is not if it is more in the interest of the United States or more in the interest of the European Union or of the corporations, the financial groups, etc. That's the question how we want in future produce and how we want to in future to consume. The way of life is on the stake. It means that if we are establishing a common market, which is of course from the economic logic and a scenario, then it means we have to decide that this common market is really questioning all of us. Do we want to continue this way of life and the way of consumption we are organizing daily? That means we have to translate into the public debate, into the public understanding, what the real content of this common market is, a common market without the political and democratic decision-making power of the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to try and stay on time here. We're going to go to Pablo Sanchez from EPSU. Pablo, I cut you down to 6 minutes, unfortunately, to try and stay on track here. So 6 minutes for Pablo Sanchez on public health services.
Before you click the button, how many minutes I get for each red card? That's just a question.
Well, you have to buy Jean-Claude Juncker a drink for every red card you get.
I don't mind. I mean, just to announce on the 19th, some Belgian trade unions affiliated to our organization are actually trying to block the summit. So we're on this issue, so I don't mind giving him 20 drinks if I get 2 minutes more. Now, because, I mean, I got cut 1 minute. So in 7 minutes, I have to speak on 6. I have to speak on 3 trade agreements. So just on this debate that is appearing, it is not just a trade agreement with the United States, and this is very important. We have one with Canada. I think Scott just mentioned it, and we can have an ISDS mechanism through the back door, but probably I'm the first one to mention TISA in a comprehensive way, but we have another agreement as EU, so 28 member states, plus other 20-odd members only on services. This is the Multilateral Investment Agreement 2 or GATS 2, or put it as you like. So if you add TTIP, CETA, TISA, TPP, which in the States is actually more important, what you see is the creation of a big trading bloc. I wouldn't even call it transatlantic. You could call it transatlantic Pacific. Where you live outside of the world, probably 80% of the world population, 60–70% of the world population. So it is not just a trade agreement with the United States. And going back to my issue about health and social services, which is a big chunk of the working people that we do represent, you have probably seen, and if you haven't seen, I invite you to surf through the website of the European Commission to go to the reassurance pages called facts, as they call it, on the three, on CETA, on TTIP and TISA, and you will find that the Commission is assuring us that they are protecting public services. Now, we are extremely happy that the Commission gives us assurance of the protection of public services, and on the 10th of November, in a civil society dialogue with the negotiator, in this case on TISA, I ask, what do you mean by protecting public services? And moreover, what do you mean by public services, since there is no legal definition at the European level on what is a public service? So, well, I'm still waiting for an answer. So we have service of general interest. I won't bore you with this internal market stuff, which tend to be very important for us, but we have services of economic general interest, service of general interest, but those definitions are political definitions that can be changed as we go along. And it is true that any trade negotiation has an immediate impact on legislation as it comes. We saw it with the European Citizens Initiative on the right to water, and how they had to promise us that they would not include water on CETA. Now we see wastewater, which we consider part of the water cycle. So when the Commission assures that they're going to protect public services, and 17 days later we have a public statement by the new Commissioner of the new boss of DG Sanco saying that the Commission wants to move to have a European health market, then we really wonder what are all those assurances. And Andrew, sorry for it's too early in the term to actually get all the names right. Andrew Kaitis has been very precise in saying we want to have a European health market like the energy market. This market that is working fully well. No one is getting cut from energy consumption because they cannot pay, like has happened in Spain. There is no debate about blackouts like happened in Spain, in Belgium. So since the European liberalization of the energy market has worked so well, so we're going to move into creating a European health market. Now, this is an important lead balloon by the Commission in a context where they are assuring us that they won't liberalize through trade agreements health and social services. They kind of push through the normal legislation. We've written a letter to the Commissioner, and we are, well, waiting for a response. But if we put together, and this is something that neither the Commission nor the Council, and very rarely the majority in the European Parliament do, put together what happens today in the Member States, what happens today at the European level, and what is being negotiated in the transnational level, what we see is a major push to liberalise health services at all levels. And social services, and this is a very good source of income for investment funds, for companies that actually stopped making profits in the financial markets since 2008, and they're moving to a cash-rich so-called industry. I'll just put a very brief example. I'm just basically squeezed off time. But if you look, for instance, the push that there is now to get more private sector involvement, more charities, more foundations to deal with things such as childcare. Now, there is like a sprinkle, mushrooming of ideas like kindergarten tickets, what in French you call chèque garderie or ticket guarderia, which is being pushed by the very same multinationals that are lobbying in favor of TTIP. Namely, I'll just take the Spanish example. There's a company called Edenred who's pushing for giving its employees vouchers so they can send the children to the nurseries. Nurseries that are being cut because of budget cuts. But these very same multinationals, Unión Fenosa, Endesa, etc., are actually pushing for this. So when you see them actually pushing for an opening of this market, I know, that's one drink for Juncker. I don't mind, I'll get him a left. So we will see that the thing comes into the conclusion. So just three very brief points. We've opposed CETA because it has in its the contents of it has ISDS and this regulatory framework that is extremely dangerous for the municipal level. And since we have a text, we know that we can oppose it. We have been demanding more transparency and the text of all the trade agreements. I've been informed that in the next 2-3 days we will have a leaked document. I'll really finish because this is meaningful for the people in the audience. We will have a leaked document of the chapter of TISA on net neutrality and big data. And what we are actually perceiving is we're going to have an ACTA 2 within TISA. So all those working on net neutrality, big data and data privacy, please watch this space, because in the negotiations of TISA they are trying to reopen what they couldn't do in the ACTA agreement. And you see, I finish with this, the very same meeting on the civil society dialogue where the Commission say we should just, and I'll finish with this, we should judge the Commission for the track record. They have an open services. We have demanded, and this is a very important point for us, we will oppose all these trade agreements as long as there is no an exclusion to all public services as we define them, like we have a cultural exclusion for the audiovisual services like the French government asks. So since we do not have this, we will be opposing these trade agreements. The Commission asks for a judgment on the track record, and since the credit of the current Commission is very low due to the LuxLeaks and other things like the 300 billion Juncker plan, we will be opposing this. So sorry for having been a little bit longer, but I think it was meaningful to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Pablo. Okay. The applause means don't tell them off. Okay, thank you. Our parliamentary response from Eleonora Forenza, MEP. Thank you, Eleonora.
Sì, allora cercherò.
Well, I'll try to stick to 3 minutes in my response to what's been said. I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think that as Pablo said, the internal public health services is going to be put at risk by these treaties. I'm looking specifically at TTIP. As you recalled, the Commission has given a lot of verbal reassurances that public services will be excluded from TTIP. And this has been used a lot for propaganda, even by the Italian presidency during its half year in the presidency. What the Italian presidency has been doing is, on the one hand, to say that they want to accelerate the negotiating rounds, but on the other hand, to reassure people that public services won't be touched. As you rightly said, however, it's not wholly clear what's understood by public services. So it's not exactly clear what's going to be excluded from the agreement. At the moment, it seems that anything that cannot be privatized, that's the only thing that will be excluded from the agreement. But that's a very ambiguous definition. It's also not clear whether exclusion from the agreement will be through a positive or negative list. whether there's going to be actual explicit mention of what's going to be excluded or not, what is subject to privatization. The other point, and I'm trying to stick to my 3 minutes here, but the other point I wanted to make refers to everything to do with service management. For example, private capital or mixed capital services. We're not sure if that actually involves public services. And the whole issue of republicizing mixed capital businesses without bringing sanctions from ISDS upon you. So I think from this perspective, we're going to have to oppose TTIP. I'm finishing now. I think what would be helpful is if we have intergroups at parliamentary level on common goods and public services and try to come up with a clear, explicit definition of public services to ensure that we know exactly what really will be excluded from the TTIP.
Eleonora, much appreciated. Thank you very much. Okay. We're going now to Kenneth Howe from Corporate Europe Observatory on how regulatory cooperation undermines democracy. Kenneth, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Kenneth. I work with a group called Corporate Europe Observatory. It's our mission to keep an eye on corporate lobby groups in Brussels, how they influence EU policies. So to us, TTIP is a lot of work. We have two main priorities. One is ISDS, which needs no further presentation, and the second priority is what's called regulatory cooperation. What is regulatory cooperation? Basically, you could say that regulatory cooperation is the solution of the EU and the US to a big problem that they have at the negotiations. They know very well that they will not be able to take it very far on regulation. They will not be able to have, say, the same rules on chemicals or food when negotiations have finished. So they need to have some kind of procedures in the future that will enable them to work towards that end, towards regulatory convergence. Why would a group like mine work on that? Well, this started a year ago. We made two separate discoveries. The first was that we came across documents from two big business lobby groups, the US Chamber of Commerce and Business Europe. It was a plan of theirs on how regulatory cooperation should work. It was a very detailed proposal. And the conclusion was, or the aim of that proposal was for business to be able to, in their own words, to co-write regulation. They would not be satisfied with an advisory role. They would really want to be at the table when rules was to be made in the future. The second discovery was a leak from the European Commission in the beginning of December. We got our hands on a document written by the Commission. It was a proposal for the TTIP negotiations on how regulatory cooperation should work between the two. Now, the striking thing was that the two proposals were very, very similar, that the Commission had actually taken almost a cut and paste action from the proposal of the business groups into the TTIP negotiations. What are the implications? I don't think I will have time to go into all the details, so I will highlight two points, two main problems. First is about how will it be when in the future under these rules, the proposed rules, what will it be like when we want to improve on existing regulations? There is one mechanism in there called the early warning mechanism, and it's a well-known animal. There has been an early warning procedure between the EU and the US in the past as well, so we know a bit about how it works. One example is that some years ago, more than a decade ago, the Commission started considering banning hazardous substances in electronic equipment. That proposal, well before it was presented to any parliament or to public debate, it was announced as an early warning issue by business groups and discussed between the EU, the European Commission and the US government and business groups. What came out in the end, and that was very interesting, was something very different from the initial ideas of the Commission. Initially, the Commission wanted a proposal that would be modelled over the precautionary principle. That was dropped. That is a very important principle in the treaty and in EU environmental policies, and it was dropped. So in the end, due to this early warning mechanism, it was sidelined, and in the end we had a directive that was, you could argue, in some ways contrary to the EU treaty. So regulatory cooperation can be a very, very serious stumbling block when we want to improve on regulation in the future. Second point, it will enable lobby groups to roll back existing regulation. The idea of the Commission is to have what they call a regulatory cooperation council. It will be made up of people from the European Commission and from an official US office called the OIRA, Office of Information on Regulatory Affairs. Some US allies call it the place where good ideas go to die. That Regulatory Cooperation Council will have the responsibility to work towards regulatory convergence in the future, and one of the things they will have to do is to discuss and consider proposals that come from business lobby groups. For instance, if the chemical sector would be able to produce a proposal, and they will, on how chemicals should be dealt with on both sides of the Atlantic, the Regulatory Cooperation Council would to some extent be forced to take it forward. So regulatory cooperation could both be a danger to existing regulation, and it will certainly be a serious obstacle to regulatory progress in the future. Besides this, this horizontal model of regulatory cooperation, this will be supplemented by proposals on per sector. And in the course of this year, 2 proposals have come out, one from chemicals, on chemicals, presented by the European Commission, basically modelled over a proposal from the 2 big chemical sectors lobby groups from the US and the EU, and another proposal on finance. I think we will be discussing that later today in a workshop. The City UK, a financial lobby group, has bragged that it's practically taken out of one of their brochures. I have now seen a red card, so I guess, but if I may say that, well, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kenneth. Parliamentary response is from Oscar Matute, Basque MP. Oscar, thank you. You have 3 minutes.
Buenos días.
Good morning, everyone. Politics, we often hear, is the art of the possible. I don't think anything is impossible. Everything that we want to do is possible. Now, in this game, the transnationals have all of the power, ensuring that people and populations in states can't decide about their own lives, their own futures, or to build a social model which will provide dignity for all. I think there are 3 points that have come out of all of the interventions. The ISDS has come out of everything, and regulatory control. This is one of the points for us which is most dangerous within the treaty. And in my party, there are many people who oppose this, because what it does is to break with any kind of balance, to prevent the public authorities from intervening, and gives all the power to multinationals. It's not just a trade agreement. It's not just a way of improving the conditions in the imbalances between multinationals and citizens. It's one step further forward for neoliberalism. Because of we see privatization. A lot of areas which are currently in the public sphere and guarantee social cohesion are going to be affected by this. Then we have regulatory cooperation. This plays a fundamental role because it will allow multinationals to use the resources from any state which tries to oppose them, and to ensure that they can oppose any state from guaranteeing these rights to their citizens. And then we have environmentalism. They believe that the earth, natural resources are a good at the service of these people. We see fracking, we see the tar sands, as we heard about. These are going to be fundamental points in this. I don't want to see a red card, so I'll be quick as I can. I think Silvia Federici, a feminist writer, said that the last barrier against capitalism is women's right to rule their own bodies. Escuderia, at my party, we oppose this. And we will be the final point in opposing this in this treaty, which is going to have a massive impact on the future of our people.
Thank you, Oscar. We have time for 2 questions. We're coming into the last few minutes of this session before Monica takes over. And show your hands, please, if you want to ask this question. So we'll give 4 minutes for each block of questions. And if you can make a short question, speaking your own language, and if you want to address it to any of the panelists in particular, it's fine.
Voy a hablar en español.
I'll speak Spanish. My question is as follows. We've heard here that the treaty will be voted on in the European Parliament, and that we have to vote on the treaty as a whole, yes or no to the treaty as a whole. Is the treaty also going to be voted in national parliaments? So the question is, if a country says that the treaty has to be voted on in its national parliament, will this be possible? And if it is possible, if a national parliament, for instance Spain, votes against the treaty, what will happen?
Helmut, you want to take this first?
So the decision is principle first. If it is going to the member state level, if the Council is not agreeing to this proposal from the Commission, then it will be going through the member state level. And then, of course, all the parliaments, according to the state constitutional law, have to decide. So in Belgium, that are 6 or 8 parliaments have to decide. In Germany, there is the federal level of the Bundestag, as well as when there are parts where the Länder have to agree with, and it is also going to the Bundesrat, the chamber. So that Spain would be then the same case if, according to the constitutional law, the regions in Spain have to agree with, then they have also to be consulted according to the national law. It's clear?
Okay, we're going to try and get 2 questions in here. So you still want to ask your question? Okay, identify yourself and ask, and I'll get one panelist to answer, then go straight to another question. Okay.
Okay, buen día. Esta es una pregunta para Oscar.
This is a question for Oscar Matute. You were talking about an obscure treaty which will open the door to multinationals, as we heard in the morning. But above all, a treaty which won't serve European people. The fact that a lot of European people are opposing this in a violently visceral way. Do you think that at European level this could be homogenization of trade rights? Basically, it's a question of sovereignty, about economic, social, environmental will of the people. When the Canadian representative was talking about multinationals, we in Galicia have one a specific relevant case. De Wharton, the Canadian company, it lacks transparency altogether, and when it's mining, and under the Conservative governments, it wants to set up projects which don't meet European environmental legislation. This is clear in the case of fracking, and we've seen this in a lot of cases. The right to decide, which you referred to, I just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
1 minute also, okay. De manera muy breve. Es decir, nosotros entendemos que.
Very briefly, this is a direct attack on the markets from transnational companies. So, possibilities of opposing this attack, this TTIP, we don't have very many of them at the moment. If this treaty is imposed on us, what we will be able to do will become much less. When you set up a nation, a company, when you think about the rights of people, how they live in dignity and equality, that's all very well and good, but this agreement allows companies to ask for sanctions and penalties that will not allow countries to guarantee their rights, people's rights. So we've always said that decisions have to be taken here because they affect all of us, not just as consumers but as citizens. So we would like the Basque Country to protect us, but if all of this goes through, our power to do all of that will be severely limited.
Thank you, Oscar. Okay, we have time for one question. Short question addressed to one panelist, please. Yes.
Oui. Oui, c'est une.
It's a recommendation, a proposal. I'd like to ask you what you think about what I have to say. The question is very brief. A clear definition of public services. Now, for that, it's important to define that in terms of the objectives. Public services are about universal access to human rights. They're services that lead to access to human rights. It's important to define it in that way because the private sector cannot guarantee that in a universal way. A homeless person, no private house owner can guarantee a homeless person housing. Only the state can do that. It's very important to bear that in mind. And I think that that definition would allow us to find a solution which is in keeping with all of the European Union's countries' needs.
I'll catch up. Yes, there is, I mean, this is the crux of the matter for us, not having a proper definition of the use of public services, not just the function or the profit that you can make of. I can imagine that you can make profit of almost everything in life. Air, if it was up to having air meters. We have demanded a protocol, a framework protocol at the European level on the definition of public services, but with the current balance of forces at the European level, I don't think this is going to happen in the immediate future. Now, I do not think we should be on the resistance all the time. I think we should also push for such a definition while we are opposing this type of treaties. Now, the difficulty will be to actually have a proper definition that actually fits to all 28 member states, because the level of public services is not the same in France than in the UK or in Romania. So it's a big work. I mean, Fiorenzo was talking about the intergroup here in the Parliament. We will continue to push for this agenda, but I think it would be a great way of making echo about this idea of having a proper definition of the use of public services, of the value of public services at the European level, using it as a way against these trade agreements that put in danger the current situation, which is already not good enough.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Fabio. We come to the end of our session, this first session this morning. Monica De Sisto from Fairwatch is going to take over here and bring us into the next session. Let me just thank our panellists this morning, Cecile Toubeau from Transport and Environment, Helmut Schultz, MEP, Scott Harris from the Council of Canadians, Thomas Fons in Australia, of Australia University, Anne-Marie Mineur from MEP, also from the Netherlands, Pablo Sanchez, EPSU, Eleonora Forense, MEP, Kenneth Haar from the Corporate EU Observatory, Oscar Matute, Basque MP also. To Gabby Zimmer and Susan George, thank you for your time also. Monica, the chair is yours.
Thank you.
Bonjour, Monica Sisto, welcome. So, we are starting in a few minutes. Please take your seat. Yeah. Once again, take your seat because we'll go starting now. Haha. Good to know. So, I'm introducing you in English, but I'll shift in Italian to a few minutes, so because we are promoting diversity, cultural diversity, so I'll be back in my mother tongue in 2 minutes. Allora,
So we're just waiting for some of the speakers who are coming from the press conference where they've been introducing the European initiative. It's been rejected by the Commission. at a popular level, it has been nonetheless continued and has 1 million signatures. Today, on President Juncker's birthday, we will be giving the petition to him, and we'd invite you all to attend that at 1 o'clock. So while I wait for everyone on the panel to get up to the top table, we're going to have a slight change in the order. So for 7 minutes, I'll give the floor to Orion Brinkman, who's president of the European Consumers Organization. He'll be opening the second session. This is a session in which we'll be hearing from active citizens and civil society. They'll be taking the floor and making their voices heard, together with institution representatives. So I'll give the floor first of all to Orion Brinkman.
Prego.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for inviting. Am I there? Yeah. Okay, thank you for inviting me. My name is Örjan Brinkman, and I'm the president of BEUC, who is the European Consumer Organization. I'm also at the same time, or I don't know if it's the same time, but actually it's the same time, I'm also the president of the Swedish Consumers, so I'm from Sweden. I'm going to talk a little about the citizens raise their voices, and when we talk about the citizens at this time, it's the consumers. It's the consumer perspective. I want to start and say, because the topic is about the TTIP negotiation and the TTIP agreement, I just want to start and say that the European consumers are actually not against the trade agreement with the United States. A trade agreement between the European Union and US can be good for the consumers. It can bring more choices, it can lower prices, and maybe create more innovation. But this is only acceptable if it doesn't lead to lowering of our standards in terms of health, safety, legal and economic rights, as well as sustainability. And now all the negotiators, they reassure us in their speeches there will be no lowering of standards. But in real life, when the main target is reduction of cost, as our standards are not similar between European Union and the United States, there is a huge pressure on lowering the standards, either directly or indirectly. I will try to explain a little about how we look at it. You can ask yourself the question, at the end of the day, will TTIP reduce consumer protection standard or will it not? We can today see a big mobilization from the civil society organizations all over Europe expressing their concern about TTIP leading to risk of sacrificing consumer protection standards to benefit of a freer trade. And I will repeat it again, because what we always hear is that there is no intention of lowering consumer protection standards in the TTIP. And when I speak in different situations, I often hear, stop scaring people. But is there an absence of intention to lower standards? As a whole, we can say that a lot of public documents from business indicates that this is certainly the intention of companies to get rid of several consumer protection rules in the European Union. They have been outspoken in the United States about food safety rules, labeling requirements, GMO standards. And what do they say? They say it's being unacceptable barriers to trade. And US business puts enormous pressure to the US negotiators to take over that agenda. Will the negotiators be able to resist? Because I think it's important for us to realize that what is for some people an obstacle is for the other people and a protection. And I can assure you to tell you that I would have been happy to say that this is the consumers' organizations who created this way of looking at things that we have in Europe. But I can be sorry to say it's not, because it's actually the whole civil society, but it's also the politicians in the European countries who over 40 years have raised the level of consumer protection. And we are not going to put that at risk. I will quickly talk about some topics that we are concerned about. And in the rhetoric, when we talk about these questions, it's also important to say that, of course, we are being the ones who is being protective and the one who's putting down and trying to say, stop, stop. And that is not because we're against the total thinking about a trade agreement, but we think there are details, and big details, in the trade agreement that we need to see better and that need to be more visible. And food is one of the most sensitive chapters, because our food safety system is different. In Europe, you know, we have the fork to farm to fork approach, where all the operators in the supply chain need to respect certain rules of hygiene and things like that. While we can see, if we look at how they work with things in the United States, they only care about the end of the chain, decontamination. I can't even pronounce it. And of course, that is much cheaper, but less efficient. This is a huge pressure on this topic to be mutually recognized. So if we don't look carefully into this question and try to put in brakes and ask for securance in the negotiations, this will be something that we will see. I can take one more example. If you look at something that has been, I don't know how much it has been in the debate in every country, but a lot of the debate in Sweden has been about chlorine chicken. Do you recognize it? Yep. The chicken is dipped in chloride to remove salmonella, and this is prohibited in the European Union. And in Sweden, we don't do it. And the way we deal with the animals actually creates a situation where we actually don't have to use antibiotics that much. And looking at the question about antibiotics, of course that is a benefit in the long run also. That is another topic that I think we should address. And when we ask this question, we always get the answers from Cecilia Malmström also, that TTIP will not take into these questions. I will actually end, because I got a red card. There are a lot of sectors. It comes to chemicals, it comes to a lot of different things that we need to address in another way. And of course also we have addressed the ISDS, the investor-to-state dispute settlement, that we say this is not needed. And you can go into the BEOC homepage to look at our position papers and why we don't think it's needed. I will end up with telling you that what is going to happen in the negotiations is that it's going to be regulatory cooperation in the end. We will talk about how we will deal with things, and that can be difficult. What has also happened that is important for us, if we go back to the beginning, the most important thing is that the things that happen in the negotiation is visible. We need to be able, you need to put in the civil society, give them a possibility to look at the text. Only if you open up the text and allow discussion, we can only influence it. I will end with saying this. We can learn a lot from each other if there is a will to exchange best practice and harmonize upwards. But this goes against the current mainstream trend of reducing costs to industry. Unfortunately, get rid of tariffs and quotas. This would already open up market considerably. Align standards to highest one and exchange best practice between regulators. And last but not least, share negotiating text with stakeholders before adopting to allow for meaningful input from us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, we have now, adesso abbiamo al tavolo.
We now have Michael Heffler at the table, who's one of the people who initiated this Europe for Citizens initiative and one of the main people, main driving forces behind it. And as we have also the people who are back promoting this in the press conference. Go ahead, please.
Well, good morning. Many thanks for the invitation. So I'm one of the representatives of the European Citizens Initiative Stop TTIP, and I'm here for two reasons. First of all, I want to participate in this interesting conference, and the second thing, I want to celebrate the birthday of Jean-Claude Juncker, because today is his birthday. I think it's a good day to celebrate. He will be 60 years old, and we will go to the Commission's building at 1 o'clock and we'll tell him that we are not satisfied with his policy at all. And I have a big present for him, a big present for his 60th birthday, and this is more than 1 million signatures against TTIP and CETA. Thanks. By the way, I hope if you're European citizens that you already have signed the initiative. If not, come to me and then we will we'll cure that shame. Okay, but let me go back to the start of the initiative. We started it at the beginning of the year. It was nearly half a year intensive preparations of this campaign, and on 15th of July we tried to register the European Citizens Initiative officially at the European Commission. And I hope you and I think all of you are aware of the fact that the European Commission decided not to register the ECI because of two really shaky and ridiculous reasons. They say a negotiating mandate is only a preparatory act with no legal effect on citizens, and it's really curious, they say you can only ask the Commission to do positive laws, so you can ask the Commission to conclude CETA, for example, or to conclude TTIP, but could not do the opposite wrong, the opposite. You cannot say, please do not conclude TTIP or please do not conclude CETA. And that's really, I would say, a perversion of democracy, and we are really not pleased with that decision. Of course, our response was to go to the European Court of Justice. We challenged that decision at the beginning of November. But much more important, I think, we will not only wait for the decision of the European Court of Justice. We just started the campaign and we just started signature gathering. We managed to start a self-organized European Citizens Initiative. This means we will stick as close as possible to the official rules. And this means we aim to gather at least 1 million signatures in 12 months, and these signatures have to come from at least 7 member states. So, and as I just said at the beginning, just at the last week, we are managed to gather the first 1 million of signatures, and also very close in the past, on Sunday, Luxembourg was the 6th country to reach the country quorum, and already yesterday, France was the 7th country to fulfill the member state quorum. So we have already 7 member states that were ready to gather the member state quorum. I can just give it to you. It's Germany, Austria, Finland, Slovenia, UK, France and Luxembourg. I think also geographically an interesting division, and this really shows that the protest and the resistance against TTIP and CETA is not only a struggle in 1 or 2 big member states. It's really a European struggle. Of course, a lot of signatures are coming from the big member states, but you cannot really blame, like the Commission is doing it. This is only a problem of, for example, Germany or France. No, it's not. It's a problem for democracy. It's a problem for the rule of law, and it's a problem for a lot of citizens in Europe. So we will go to the Commission's building at 1 o'clock and we will present Juncker and his team symbolically the first 1 million signatures. I invite all of you, because it's in the break of this conference, to come with us in front of the Commission's building. It will be announced in more detail later on. And of course, how will we go on? Definitely we will go on with the signature campaign. We will not stop. We will head for the next 1 million. So the next goal is to reach at least the 2nd million. We will try to reach much more country quorum. It's really important. It's really important that we will reach out to much more countries. If we really want to stop TTIP and CETA, it's not enough to have, let's say, 2 or 3 or 4 countries where there's really a lot of struggle or really a lot of protest. No, we need to reach out to much more countries. I hope all of you will help us. Last word on the left party. I'm really pleased that the left party and the left alliance in the European Parliament is supporting the campaign. Many thanks for that. But I think there's much more potential. For example, when I look to countries like Spain or Greece or Netherlands, where are much stronger left parties than other countries, I hope that also these countries and the left parties especially will enter the campaign and help us to get the next million. And then I'm really sure, because we already defeated a free trade agreement in the past, the multilateral agreement of investment was defeated, and I'm really sure if we go on with the struggle, we have the chance to kill and to stop TTIP and CETA. Many thanks.
Thank you so much. Grazie. Michael Effler.
Thank you, Michael Effler, and also thank you for having respected the time. Melinda San Luis from Public Citizens USA, who is helping us in our European battle and has been doing so for a very long time. Now we're working on TTIP, CETA and TISA. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here as representing Public Citizen, which is a consumer organization in the U.S. We are also a member of the Citizens Trade Campaign in the United States, which is a broad coalition. We join policymakers and civil society here in Europe in raising concerns about TTIP because we believe that food and chemical safety standards we rely on to protect our health, and the energy and climate policies that are needed to save our planet, and the financial regulations that are designed to prevent banks from gambling with our money, all of these types of policies need to be determined in open, democratic venues where we as citizens have a voice, not behind closed doors in secretive negotiations such as the TTIP, and in the United States, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that the United States is also negotiating between the U.S. and Asian and Latin American countries. In the U.S., there are 600 corporate advisors who are explicitly advisors, have access to the text of these negotiations, while the public and the press and most of our elected officials are basically locked out. And we've heard already many experts talking about how there's serious concern and good reason for concern here in Europe about what TTIP could mean for European standards. But I also want to bring the voice and the perspective from the U.S. that we as U.S. citizens also have good reason to oppose this corporate agenda. First, we have lived through 20 years of the grand experiment of the North America Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. Proponents of NAFTA promised wonderful things. They promised jobs, millions of jobs. They promised, well, hundreds of thousands of jobs per year. They promised reduction in income inequality, raising living standards. But 20 years later, basically the opposite had happened in our country. In 10 years, at least 1 million jobs were lost due to this. 1 in 4 manufacturing jobs in the United States during the era of NAFTA disappeared. That led to a depression of wages across the board because jobs that were created were lower wage service sector jobs. Economists agree that our U.S. trade policy has led to the increase in income inequality in the U.S. And incredibly, it also decimated the livelihoods in in Mexico and Canada as well. In Mexico, 2 million small-scale farmers were displaced due to the dumping of U.S. corn, and so immigration doubled. So NAFTA also included the controversial ISDS, investor-state dispute settlement mechanism that has been discussed here. We have been tracking all of the cases that have been brought under U.S. free trade agreements and investment treaties. Already, just under those treaties, $3.6 billion in taxpayer money has been paid to corporations. There's $38 billion pending in those cases. They've attacked public health policies, toxic bans, environmental policies, and much more. And so it's not a surprise, given this record of this style of trade agreement, that one of the few things that unites people in the United States across party lines, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, is a rejection of trade deals modeled on NAFTA. Poll after poll has shown that. And so now, as we approach this new generation of trade agreements, such as the TTIP and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, we called on our government to rethink the model, to learn the lessons from the past. But unfortunately, even though President Obama, when he was a candidate, promised to have a different approach and to actually renegotiate NAFTA, once in office, started promoting the same policy as his predecessor, George W. Bush, when he concluded the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement, then started negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, more secretive than even past administrations. As I mentioned, the corporate advisors have access where the public has been locked out. In addition to many of these procedural concerns, we share many of the concerns that have been raised today about ISDS, public services, regulatory cooperation. And in the back, I have some new research that we just are releasing today with BEUC that shows that expanding ISDS in TTIP would newly empower 47,000 U.S. corporations to attack Europe's public interest laws outside European courts. And if ISDS is only included in CETA but not TTIP, 81% of those U.S. firms, with just a strike of the pen, could still use ISDS to attack European laws. And we also know that EU negotiators have explicitly been calling for TTIP to roll back the important Wall Street reforms that we have undertaken since the financial crisis, and that the U.S. negotiators are still promoting rules that would conflict with too big to fail regulations or financial transaction taxes. Just last week, U.S. congressional leaders in the Financial Services Committee wrote a letter opposing this and opposing U.S. ISDS and free trade agreements. The procurement policies are also a strong outrage in the U.S. that European officials are wanting to eliminate popular buy local policies that allow us to reinvest U.S. tax dollars at home and at the local level to support jobs. So what are we doing about this in the U.S.? As I mentioned, there's a broad coalition of U.S. consumer, environmental groups, family farmers, trade unions, faith organizations, chemical and food safety organizations, financial reform advocates, organic consumers associations that have been campaigning to stop Congress from fast-tracking these deals. In the U.S., there is fast-track authority is the very extreme authority where Congress delegates its authority to the President to negotiate these deals and bring them back for just an up or down vote. This is a very extreme delegation of authority in the U.S. Congress does not want to give this authority to President Obama. 500 U.S. civil society organizations have joined together to campaign against fast-track, so to not handcuff Congress in this way. More than 1 million people have signed a petition opposing fast-track for the Trans-Pacific Partnership and TTIP. And this has led to a stunning 3/4 of the President's own party, Democratic Party, in the House of Representatives, opposed fast-track before a bill was even introduced. The vast majority of Republicans are opposing, Republican voters are opposing fast-track. And so even with the recent change in the U.S. Congress after the midterm elections, the dynamic has not changed, that almost all Democrats oppose fast track, and there's a large section of conservative Republicans as well who don't want to grant any authority to President Obama. So by keeping fast track derailed and shining a light on the dangers of TTIP through our grassroots public education and engaging the media and bringing our critiques to policymakers, we're looking forward to continuing to collaborate with our European colleagues to stop TTIP. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Allora, siamo...
Okay, we're within the time allowed, so I think we can allow 4 questions, each of 2 minutes. So you have to say who you are and who you are introducing your question to. Who would like to go first? Go ahead, please.
Is it on?
Si deve presentare.
Yeah. Introduce yourself, please.
Of course, Stop TTIP UK. I want to address this question to Oyen. Your position really frustrates me because it's you say we support TTIP, but there's problems with it. It could be good if it was different, but these problems are not Christmas decorations, they are the fundamentals of the agreement, so it's hard to understand the position. When I say this, I am aware that the UK Consumers Organisation is the weakest on this, and perhaps there's room for a boycott there. And I'm also aware that what I'm saying is also true for some core parts of the trade union movement, that it's got this same ambivalence. You can't be accused, as a consumers organisation, you can't really be accused of special interest in the sense that we're all consumers now. We're only addressed as consumers. We've become just consumers. And that's your representational role. So you can't have that sort of accusation put to you that perhaps unions can have. So it frustrates me that while so many people are working to kill this agreement, you are in fact still supporting it and allowing yourself to be used by a member state, in my case, and European governments to say, look, consumers support this, and perhaps also true of trade unions. So we have more important things to do. We have climate change issues to work on. Sort this one out. It's what you're paid to do. Sort this one out, please.
Thank you so much. Abbiamo altre 3 domande.
3 more questions, each of 2 minutes.
Oui, je crois qu'il est de plus.
I think it's more and more important.
Merci.
Just one point on the European Citizens Initiative. I work for the GUE. I am from France, from a left-wing party. But I would say that from a legal point of view, the Commission was in its had the right to reject the Citizens Initiative, and even if it had achieved the number of signatures, it would not have achieved anything to the extent that it doesn't oblige anyone to produce any new legislative texts. Nevertheless, it's a very important initiative in the fight against all of these trade treaties. Thank you.
Merci. Altre 2 domande.
2 more questions. Yes, please.
Je pense que
I think it's more and more important with the progress of the negotiations to realize that we need to take a global approach. Now, there are 4 blocks which are forming. There is the NATO trade bloc, which we talked about before, Europe, North America. There's another bloc, which is a Trans-Pacific bloc. And then there are the economic partnership agreements with the ACP countries, African, Caribbean and Pacific countries. And the 4th bloc is the BRICS. They are already somewhere in the place where our powers are trying to lead us. So there are 4 blocks that are forming, which will fight amongst one another to have the strongest regulations possible, and it's the least it's the most deregulated that will attract all of the business players. And that's the way that's what we need to bear in mind in approaching the problem. There's NAFTA, which is North America. It's not just Canada and the USA. The speaker's microphone's gone off.
L'ultima.
One last question, if there are any more. Yes, please.
Hello, Tina Shivacheva from King's College London. Thanks to the panel. My question is with regard to the free trade agreement, trade liberalization that the European Union concluded with South Korea. And at that time, the justification for that was that South Korean's car will come to Europe, but the European pharmaceutical companies will gain a foothold in South Korea. So the European companies otherwise would be competing with US pharmaceutical companies, and in this case, by preempting free trade agreement between the USA and South Korea, the European pharmaceutical companies would have first mover advantage. In this particular case, which are the large European conglomerates in industries that would have interest in gaining foothold in the US market?
So, allora, cominciamo con I consumatori.
So we'll start with the consumers. I think this lady was very angry indeed, so we'll start with the consumers.
Thank you. Yeah, I can understand what you say, but I think you need to realize that BEUC is an organization that consists by organizations from different countries. And when we create a position, I can assure you that we meet, and it's a lot of fighting about what we will land in the position. But what we thought was important actually is that we find an agreement, and you also yourself told me about that all of you can realize that it's a lot of different views on the negotiation in the different countries. So this is what we agreed on when we created the position papers. We took a lot of effort to go into the areas that it was, I think, is our responsibility. I can have a personal opinion that goes in another direction than my organization, but of course when I'm here as BEUC president, I have to stand on the common ground that we have in this position, and the position that we have been taking is that we focus on the areas, and maybe because we think that that is our purpose, and here you are another group and you have another purpose, and you can act in this framework that you have. It has not been possible for BEUC to do in another way, because we have to find an agreement about a common platform that we could use. And of course the different countries have a lot of different opinions when it comes to the TTIP. And I can assure you that even the way we talk about TTIP now, because we are very active in the, like forcing us into the negotiations according to visibility and questions like that, to reassure that the area that we are working with and trying to safeguard is like the standard of the consumer protection. It's the most important thing for us. And then I know that there are other organizations working with other questions. Thank you.
Michael Effler, la Commissione aveva...
Mr. Effler, the Commission had the right to reject the initiative, and so?
Thank you very much. So it's true the legal effect of an European citizens' initiative is limited. It's indirect initiative. That means it's a little bit more than a petition, because you will get a hearing in the European Parliament, you will get a communication of the Commission. That's not very much, but it's it. And it's the most far-reaching instrument of participatory democracy at European Union level. If there was a possibility for a real direct democratic procedure, so for a citizens' initiative that would lead to a referendum, of course we would have used that, but there is no possibility for that. So we have to use the ECI. The ECI is much more about policy, it's much more about communication. It's a good tool to raise awareness and to attract citizens directly. And that's really necessary. If you want to stop such a big thing like the TTIP and CETA negotiations, you have to attract and approach a lot of citizens directly. We have one at least part-time success with the ECI system. That's the Right to Water campaign that managed to get the water services out of the scope of the concessions directive. And just recently in Finland there was a citizens' initiative like the European Citizens' Initiative that was successful because it leads to a law that was adopted by the Finnish Parliament to allow the same-sex marriage, and this only because of the signature campaign. So I know it's a limited effect, but I really urge everybody to support this campaign, and it's not the campaign for everything, but it's a contribution for the overall resistance against these treaties.
Thank you. Melinda, quindi I trattati andarono a costituire.
So the treaties cover different areas, as our friend said. And the basis for the rules are going to become much more liberalised in areas which are currently very regularised. Is that a correct analysis?
Yes, we definitely have been. Well, let me take a step back. One of the pieces of analysis that we at Public Citizen did at the beginning was actually to go through the thousands of comments by corporations, both in the European Union and also that when USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative, also solicited comments around TTIP. And so we got to see in their own words what a lot of the corporations have been pushing for in TTIP. And one area that I mentioned that we have serious concerns about is that in the U.S. post-financial crisis there's been a major effort to try to re-regulate the financial sector, given that the deregulation was a major cause of the financial crisis and the economic crisis. We know European banks are very anxious to include or to be able to challenge some of those regulations and to make it more difficult for more regulation to happen in that sector, particularly in the areas of insurance and you really can look across the board. Many of the different sectors have been pushing for deregulation and making it much more difficult for our democratic processes to make those decisions on our behalf.
Thank you so much. What about the Korea? Who wants to answer back?
Well, I think that my understanding of the question was that what corporations are interested, European corporations in the U.S. And I think, as I mentioned, the financial sector I know is is pushing. Also, we know that the Business Europe has been pushing very hard for U.S. procurement policies, not just at the national level, but actually they've targeted 23 individual U.S. cities that they want to make sure that any procurement contracts over a certain dollar amount would be open to any competition, and there wouldn't be an ability to restrict those types of contracts to support the local or the local level.
Grazie.
Thank you. So we're now moving on from the voices of citizens to local authorities. Many cities, many regions and administrative areas in Europe are pulling together to try to organise a response to this threat, just as their citizens are. I'll now give the floor to Eric Coquerel, who is a member of Parliament for Île-de-France, and he's going to tell us about his experience in his fight. 5 minutes, please.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, GUI, for this invitation. You can take those off the 5 minutes. Very good initiative, this. Before I talk about what I've seen in the Ile-de-France region, well, France has the same characteristics vis-à-vis the lack of democracy on this treaty as anywhere else. Social democrat hypocrisy, I think that's obvious. In 2014, in Parliament, there was an attempt to have resolutions put through. They were put forward by the leftish front in the National Assembly. The socialists actually managed to water that request down and basically made it into an objective, i.e. just looking at whether the negotiations turned out right or not. So even the leftish front MPs voted against their own proposal. Secondly, in France, you don't have different mobilizations. You don't have citizens and elected representatives. You have one association that brings together CGT, trade unions, Solidaire, political parties, Europe Ecologists, Leftist Front. There are 113 local committees around France. Various initiatives pushed forward. On the 11th of October, Day of Europe, mobilization there. And also mobilization against TTIP. But what happens is, in France, is quite particular in the local authorities. February this year, the Ile-de-France region, we put forward a proposal. We have that right to put forward texts that aren't directly linked to regional policy, but have to do with very important issues. And that text said, well, wanted to have Ile-de-France outside TTIP and wanted to have that put forward in state negotiations. It wasn't difficult to get that through, but what's interesting is in France nobody dares to go against this sort of mobilizing activity. For example, the centrist political party, they wanted to say that the motion we put forward was inadmissible. That was rejected. Then the social group, and this is a hypocrisy motion, they said that we should be sent to the committee. That was rejected as well. So finally we were able to get that text through thanks to the Europe Ecology Group and the Leftist Front. The right, the socialists, they abstained, they voted against, but still it went through. So I think there was all of this led to contagion. So there are lots of other regions now, Ile-de-France, Provence, Côte d'Azur, Rhône-Alpes, they now have got on board. They have identical, basically identical texts in the pipeline. When things get too far, the socialists talk about a moratorium and block all of this. So I think almost half of counties in France now have some sort of text at the local level, similar to what we had in the Ile-de-France region. So around 3/4 of French people now live in local authorities which have said that they are non-TTIP areas. So it's symbolic, of course. We're not regions, these are local authorities. These aren't the people that are going to be negotiating what's in TTIP. But by doing this, mobilizing people, I talked about the local committees before. I mean, it's basically there in the local committees where you have lots of people meeting. We do have a long tradition in France where we use these committees to get people mobilized. Trade unions, all of them get involved. So lots of citizens are basically involved. So it's a positive thing. To conclude, discussion we had before, the objectives I think we should have objectives at the European level, especially on the vote that's going to be taken in the European Parliament. I'll finish here. Everything has to be done to make sure that this treaty fails. It's not just a trade treaty. I think the best way to make it fail is to oblige the Commission to have each member state sign the treaty one by one. I think if we did that, we'd see that there is actually a minority of people in favour of this, and that would oblige our governments to come up with votes in national parliaments and basically referendums.
Grazie. Anche in Italia la campagna...
Thank you. The Stop TTIP campaign has also been launched in Italy, and a model that has been used by the local authorities. And the No TTIP initiative has managed to really involve a lot of local authorities. And in recent years, in the times of crisis, they're the people who've really tried to find practical responses. You know, the Italian presidency has been making itself seen in the last 6 months in the Italian presidency, but it's really the local authorities who've had to deal with all the problems on a practical basis. So, continuing our travel through local authorities, I'd now like to get 2 members of the Parliament involved. They each have 3 minutes. The first is Juan José Nue from Izquierda Unida. If you could come up to the top table, please. You have 3 minutes to tell us about your experiences. And I would also ask Elf Klaus from Link to prepare to come up afterwards.
Grazie. Tre minuti, grazie.
You have 3 minutes, please. Off you go.
Muchas gracias. Muy... Thank you very much indeed. Very briefly, just a few comments. I'm the spokesperson for the for AFET in the Congress in Madrid. So we look at various things first of all before they go to the chamber, the main chamber. We look at the key issues. On what we've heard this morning, let me just highlight a few ideas. First of all, I agree with Susan George on this vampire strategy, i.e. getting the truth out, taking it out of the darkness, this treaty. I think there are a lot of contradictions in the treaty, and I think it's very important that we get better at explaining that. But we need to translate the criticism of the treaty into normal, easy-to-understand sentences, because otherwise, I mean, the idea behind the treaty in itself is a difficult one to understand. You have to make sure that people understand what the daily consequences would be for people in the street, the consequences of this treaty. That's very important, the way we use language to mobilize people on a massive scale. Maybe people who, really know the treaty could do that. Second idea. If it's approved, this treaty, it'll be a standard. It'll have a huge legal ramifications, and that's important. If it's ratified, it'll be a reference point for all other different trade agreements, different sorts of agreements throughout the world in different parliaments. It'll be a reference point for legislation in the EU, and therefore it might actually substitute some of the constitutional texts we already have in the EU. So it's very important that we make this treaty fail. Otherwise, I mean, in Spain, for example, the Socialist Party, the Conservative Party, they modified the constitution to make the policies of austerity they were putting forward, make them constitutional, make them in line with the constitution. I mean, the constitution there should be like a wall. They're saying now that the constitutional text has said yes to some of these austerity policies. So we can't have the same happening with this TTIP. I'm finishing now. It's very important that we get these policies out onto the street, out of the Parliament, onto the street, have them there in arbitration tribunals. It's very important, this, for everybody, not just to be not just be kept in offices and bureaus.
Ernst Klaus, 3 minuti.
Ja, mein Name ist Klaus Ernst, ich bin
I'm Els Klaus. I'm the Vice President of the Linke in the German Federal Parliament. The main criticism we have there, well, there are 3 points. The lack of transparency in the procedure. Secondly, protection. And thirdly, consumer protection. Thirdly, the deregulation of rules we already have. Criticism is growing. In the Social Democrats as well, we have the Social Democrats in the government in Germany, and this has led to the Social Democrats. Well, they are now in favour of trade agreements, but basically the conditions are set so high that they couldn't necessarily vote in favour of these sorts of agreements, CETA, etc. Our economics minister had to withdraw, and they're seeing extra criticism. The trade unions in Germany have been very critical on this agreement, and resistance, I think, will increase in Germany. What we want is extra negotiations on CETA. The minister in Germany said that they're not going to renegotiate anything under CETA. There'll be no extra negotiations at all with Canada, and this is a decisive point. How are we going to move forward? We'll have to look at what arguments were being given from the other side. In Germany, well, we have the economics minister, the business minister now saying that that Europe will not be able to face the upcoming competition from Japan, China, other countries. We have to understand that and come up with arguments to counter them. Secondly, in Germany it's said that we're the only people that are having a critical debate on CETA and TTIP. Germany is the only country in Europe that's doing that. That's not true, we know that. But what is necessary is that we have more mutual information, that we exchange information between parliaments as to what's happening in European parliaments. So I would suggest that we have something here in the European Parliament, maybe our group, that would exchange information about resistance in parliaments, in social movements. So we could collect information and we could send that as quickly as possible to the various other platforms in other countries, so that we do actually know what other countries are doing, and we can therefore strengthen our resistance. Finally, I mean, we have resistance all the way through civil society in Germany. I do think we do have a chance to stop this treaty if we are well prepared. Thank you.
Grazie, siamo...
Thank you. We're absolutely on time. So we'll continue with a representation of civil society and local authorities who are opposing the agreement between the US and Canada and Europe. We're moving on now to the trade union side, and we reach in Canada. I'll give the floor to Priscilla Bita, who is from the Central Council of Metropolitan Montreal. So together with the local authorities, trade unions are playing a very important role at the moment, and we'd like to hear a bit about what you've experienced.
7 minuti.
7 minutes.
Bonjour.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to this very important conference. I work for a trade union organisation which is a member of the Quebec Network on Continental Integration that works in close cooperation with other networks in the United States, in Canada, English-speaking Canada as well, Latin America. Right from the beginning of the negotiations between the EU and United States, we work with civil society in Europe as well. January this year, we highlighted the 20 years of NAFTA, and we looked at taking stock. We looked at what the consequences were in Canada and Quebec for the countries of the three countries there. We looked at the First Nations, SMEs, and for the environment. Not very happy, I have to say, after this stock-taking exercise. The ICG is the French name for CETA. Well, this agreement, as you know, is basically just copy and paste from NAFTA. It's even worse, it's more immoral, it's more shocking, because we have this ISDS. So open public procurement now procedures now open to international competition. As you know, in Quebec and Canada, this openness in public procurement, well, we don't have basically any privatization. So it's basically a gold mine for multinationals. They're going to be able to grasp, seize everything that hasn't been privatized already. They'll be able to accumulate millions. They won't reinvest anything. They won't do anything for the benefit of communities, and they'll just continue to dictate the path to follow in the policy sphere. So it's a huge challenge for trade union organizations and society as a whole. Given all of that, trade union organizations in Quebec and throughout Canada, they've not sat back and done nothing. I'm just going to give you a few ideas of the actions we've carried out over the past few weeks, few months, and also the past few years against these agreements. Various studies, analyses, and we have basically got that information out to the interested parties. We've sent letters to MPs, prime ministers, ministers, press conferences organised, petitions launched. We've had awareness-raising tools produced for our members, but also for citizens at large. We've tried to raise awareness in local authorities. 80 town councils in Ontario, for example, have said now that they are against the CETA. We've looked at working with other countries to go against NAFTA. We've brought on board civil society organizations, the League of Freedoms, women's rights organizations, farmers organizations, environmental organizations, various joint statements in the Americas, hand in hand with Europe. We've had questions in Parliament, questions during electoral campaigns, partnerships with political parties who've said that they're against CETA, who are against TTIP, and also free trade in general. We also had the World Social Forum, World People's Forum, organized. There we heard we expressed our resistance against all measures put forward by the Conservative government. We said to Prime Minister Harper that he's going to lose the next elections. We've had exchange of information between Canada and Europe, and saying that TTIP would be a very bad thing for EU-Canada relations. And we've asked for extra public, broad, comprehensive discussions so that no free trade agreement is signed. What can we do now then? We have to continue to fight, do everything we can, do all the things I just mentioned. But for us as North Americans, we have to say to you as Europeans that what Mr. Harper is saying when he comes here to Europe, when he addresses you, what he's saying is false. It's not true that there's no opposition in Canada. There is opposition to CETA, but it is true there was a survey carried out. It was our partners who did this. The Council of Canadians did the study. It's quite a recent study. I don't know the exact dates, maybe a couple of years ago. Canadians were asked whether they were in favour of free trade. Generally said, yes, we are in favour of free trade if you ask that specific question. But if you ask them, if you explain to them the rules or regulations, the ISDS, well, straight away, 2/3 are against free trade. And when you explain what opening up public procurement means, then 80% say that they are against these sorts of treaties. So I think it's important to shed light on all of this, what these treaties mean, what the ramifications will be for people in the street if they're implemented. Europeans, well, MEPs need to have much closer ties with parliamentarians on our side of the Atlantic. We need to strengthen each other's arguments. We need to get undecided people on board and stop these treaties from being approved. It would seem that there's not very much opposition as far as the Canadian Parliament is concerned, but I just think there's not very much information being given. So exchanges between your Parliament and our Parliament, they are key. So all of these agreements, CETA, TTIP, TPP, whatever, with China, India, all of these treaties, I think we need to work together as a bloc, have a common front, otherwise we're going to lose the battle. So we have to make sure everybody's on board, include everybody, and explain that we should be rejecting this model because it's going to be dangerous, damaging to people in the street. The multilateral agreement on investment, we managed to stop that. We managed to stop the American free trade zone, the PSB, the Security Prosperity Partnership. We stopped that. We've stopped others. So now I think we can say that it's time for CETA, TTIP and all the other treaties. It's their time to be stopped as well.
E quindi riattraversiamo la...
So we'll come back over the Atlantic and we'll ask the largest European trade union, Verdi, if this is really true. We go to you, we say that we're all together, you come to us, we say that we're all together. So we want to know exactly how far there is an agreement. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I've been asked to speak my mother tongue. I will tell you that I have a strong Austrian accent. That's because I am an Austrian, even though I do work for the German Union. So I'm a cross-border person. So those people who don't know our union, it's one of the biggest unions in the world. We represent 3 million workers, more than 3 million workers, private services, public services, industrial service sector. And we're as comprehensive as the TISA agreement, in effect, even though we'd like to take some service sectors out of that agreement. Now, we are not against free trade. For example, we want fair, durable, social, sustainable social situation. If you look at all of these CETA, TTIP, TISA, they are based on an internal logic, which is that you pursue a deregulation agenda. So we are following all of these negotiations very closely and with great concern in terms of the effect on the workers and the service provision as well. What concerns us, one thing that concerns us, is the lack of transparency. The new Commissioner Malmström, for example, is carrying out a transparency offensive, which I think is more of a public relations exercise than anything else, but we're going to see basically whether she acts in a transparent way or not. It's already been mentioned that the German unions, the DGB and the other unions, have from the beginning had very clear claims with regard to the free trade agreement, which what we call our red lines. One of those is that there should not be any negative lists, so this list it or lose it principle shouldn't apply. We strongly support there being a complete the public services should not be included in this at all. We don't feel that has no place in such an agreement. Regulation and networks, these are nothing. They should be democratic decisions, and the lobbyists have far more access to information than the other players in this. Sustainability chapter, there the social and labour standards should be included, thinking here in terms of also compensation claims. We also feel that there is no legal accountability here either, which can be very damaging to states. I would now like to say that this is the only agreement about which we can talk at all. It's the only treaty that has been negotiated so far. It's already been mentioned that the German unions, and Verdi in particular, have a very critical view of this. We have the 1,500 pages before us, and I must be honest, I haven't read them all. We've done a preliminary analysis of this agreement, and based on what I've mentioned before, it's clear to us that we cannot approve this as it stands. There are a range of issues that we'd like to address. I'll see how many I can address before I get a red card. Now, workers' rights. This is all about increasing competition, and we don't think that this should be at the costs of the workers. The sustainability chapter is not approvable either. There can be no trade sanctions and no compensation payments. There should be efforts made also to ratify the ILO Kern measures, but these are not obligatory. And we feel that this chapter should be just as strongly implementable as all the other chapters. Concerning investment protection, the Commission is at the moment saying that there's lots of improvement necessary, which we don't think is sufficient. The transparency initiatives are unsatisfactory. There's no recourse either. From an ISDS point of view, it's not satisfactory either. And I think this should all be extracted from this investment chapter. Final example. There are insurances for businesses in all areas. Why do these businesses not simply take out an insurance policy? Because you can insure anything. This shows the logic that stands behind it, that you cannot generalize things. You can't simply leave the society and the states to bear all the risk. The businesses have to bear the risk themselves through insurance policies.
So we can have 3 questions to conclude this panel. 3 very brief questions. One from before, I think. Yes, please.
Xavier Pombo, Esquerra Anitza, Izquierda Unida, Euskadi.
I'm from Izquierda Unida in the Basque Country, in Spain.
A mí hay una cosa que...
Well, something I've heard during the debate, which I'm not really happy about. Sometimes you have two countries, several countries, in this case we're talking about the United States or Canada, putting them against the EU, whereas I think basically I don't think it's countries discussing any specific treaty. Somebody I'm not going to mention said that the mother of all wars is the father of all treaties. What is your question, says the chair. I think the problem is that we're debating a treaty with these multinationals, these large companies, vis-à-vis the peoples, and we, the peoples, are losing these negotiations. And I think we have to look at it from that point of view. A fight between capital and workers. That's the basic idea behind the discussion. I think it's important that some of the people talking here don't focus on, talking about my specific country. This is an issue about capital versus workers.
Second. And it's enough.
Good morning. I'm Breed Brennan from the Transnational Institute. I would just like to come back to the theme that has kind of run across the top table this session, which is the question of resistance. I think it's very encouraging for citizens and for all of us to know that the resistance is growing. However, I think it's really also important that we bring a perspective to the resistance that we can win. And in order to do that, I think it's very important to draw the lessons from NAFTA if we want to know what really happens if we get this TTIP. But I think it's equally important to draw the lessons from FTAA. And this was a tremendous example of how citizens' power across a continent could actually defeat this juggernaut of the corporations in the Americas. And I think these are the kind of lessons that we actually need to bring together and to converge in this moment. And I believe also that the citizens' initiative is extremely important, because if we want to mobilise to defeat this, we will need many, many millions of citizens who will also convince their local governments, convince their parliaments that this TTIP is really what the world does not need at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. The third one, and it's over. No, you. Yeah.
Buenas, soy David Fernández, soy de izquierda.
I'm from Spanish United Left. My question is for Eric, a very specific question. In all of the initiatives that are being developed both in the Parliament and at local level, the agricultural sector, and in particular wine production, how do they see the agreement in the Free Trade Treaty?
So, answers now? Ora le risposte. Direi l'unica.
Well, there was only one question with one specific to one person in particular, and then we'll hear from the other two.
Yeah.
Ouais. La région Île-de-France.
Well, Île-de-France is not really a wine-producing region, so I'm not sure that I can really give you an answer to that. But as I was saying before, citizen, trade union, sectoral mobilisation, particularly the sectors that are going to be most affected by this, obviously they have close relations with their elected representatives, and they can do more to ensure that more and more organisations in France oppose this. We have almost 300 organisations involved in this, and I think there are no good free trade agreements. There are good cooperation agreements between states, but free trade agreements mean fiscal and social harmonization, and that's a major trouble to economic, social issues. So we need to do everything we can to ensure that this does not pass.
L'altra domanda ci chiedeva.
The other question was to show that these agreements are a challenge to the European Social Pact against trade union citizens, etc.
Bon, je ne sais pas si je vais...
Well, I don't know if I can really answer the question properly, but yes, probably it is a fight against capital and labour. Keep in mind that when NAFTA was being negotiated in Quebec, the trade unions didn't oppose signing the agreement. We had to learn the lessons later and were very disappointed. So I'd ask you to not to trust the agreements that are on the table at the moment. The agreements are not for the people at large. They're not in favour of workers, not for women. They're not going to help immigrants. These are agreements which only serve the interests of the multinationals, regardless of which country that multinational is from. So yes, you're going to have to fight this fight. It's a fight against capital, against neoliberalism. And what we want to do now is to say that you will oppose these agreements, whatever the cost.
Ich würde auch gern zu diesem Punkt nochmal stellen.
Yes, this capital worker struggle, that's true, but it's not just that, I don't think, in CETA. It's not just against workers, it's against consumers. It's an attack against all citizens. In Germany, for example, at the moment, we have a court proceeding which is Vattenfall, the Swedish company, against Germany, the federal government, because they've got rid of nuclear energy. I mean, it's not secret, it has been published, all of this. The works minister, well, here we're talking about 4.7 billion euros at stake because of the international energy cartel. This means that all citizens in Germany will be paying those taxes, and they will be brought forward as responsible if this goes through. I think we have to show all of this up. There's a broader issue rather than just capital against the rest of the world. I think we need to look for broader associations, broader unions. And then if we do that, we'll be able to do what we want to and stop what we don't want to happen.
Ich glaube auch ein Punkt, der klar raus.
One point we've seen clearly, this is a really new generation of trade agreements. It's not just about customs anymore. Here we're going much further with these sorts of treaties. ISDS, negative lists have been mentioned, regulation, deregulation, and this goes right to the core of everything we do. One example, Vattenfall, well, to what extent can everything be pushed forward, the ratchet clause? To what extent can we push this back? An example from a colleague. We've had 115 agreements been signed by Switzerland, but the Vattenfall has not been put on the negative list there. So I think most of what we do is to explain, to show how detailed all of these regulations are going to be. Verd is doing this. We are coming with a comprehensive analysis of CETA and all of the points I mentioned before. Germany is the only country, I think, where there is a proper critical debate in the national parliament. I think the Assemblée nationale in France has also come up with a decision. In the Netherlands, I can say in Austria as well, with the council there has come forward with the decisions on this point. So one problem we have is we are looking at public procurement. We have to make sure, we have to explain why these sorts of services really do have to be exempted. But we can't leave this responsibility to somebody else. We have to say why these specific services cannot be put on the liberalisation list. And this is an issue that we do need to have. It's good that public pressure is growing, and it's good that this event is taking place here in the Parliament. I can see MEPs here. You have the last word. The European Parliament will have the last word, the penultimate word, and that you'll be able to say whether we want the treaty or not, and then you'll be able to see whether the parliaments will be, national parliaments will be brought in. I think it's important that MEPs do understand all of this, and it's good that there is public pressure in various countries to really highlight this point. For Verdi on CETA, that we can't yet agree to CETA in the way it stands.
Grazie a tutti I relatori della
Thank you to everyone who's spoken in the second session. I think we've identified three main areas. One is communication, communicating with public opinion and local politics, using local politics to ensure that all of the articles of the treaty are slowly, gradually understood and their impact is understood. So I would ask you to encourage more dialogue on the transatlantic agreement, get civil society involved with local authorities, national authorities, parliaments, on both sides of the Atlantic. And then the other point we have is Juncker's happy birthday. We have a meeting at 1 o'clock to give him the first 1 million signatures. We'll be continuing with that. I'll give the floor finally to Malin Bjork, who's Deputy President of the GUI NGL Group. I'd let her close, but I would ask all of the speakers to stay up here at the top table.
So, colleagues, friends, I have the impossible task of concluding from all the rich speakers, expertise, the analysis, the political energy that we've heard today. I will not even try to do that, but I want to make some points, and I also have a few housekeeping messages about the workshops for those of you that are registered that I will take all in the end. I will say what rooms you are going to, etc. So those of you going to workshops, please wait for that. As we have heard today, these trade agreements, they are not the old regime. They are new models of trade agreements, and it's a new generation, and as some people here have said, it is our task to kind of make this model known, what it is actually about and how we do reject this model. We believe in a model of trade that can be fair, durable and social justice, that can include components of social justice and workers' rights. And I think in this sense we have seen today that we have a strong case to build. We have heard about environment, energy, public services, consumers' rights. There are things we haven't heard so much about: agriculture, financial services, even labour standards, maybe not enough. But it is very clear that rejecting this model means that we also have to take the debate on these specific issues. It is a broad political debate, what society we want to live in, as was mentioned by my colleague here, MEP Schulz, but it's also when we try to push back and take the debate in our countries, in our local communities, here at European level, we have to also take the specific debate on public services, what is happening in the chemicals regulation, what is happening to financial services. And some of the workshops this afternoon will dig into that and give each other share analysis and share strategies how we can act in those different areas. I think it's very important to hear what has happened in NAFTA. It gives us here at European level, the work you have done to see what has actually been happening. It can help us when we build our strategy in our cases here at European level. I will just pinpoint a few of the things that was raised today. One that was raised by several of the speakers is the issue of transparency. It is very clear that I also hear when I debate this issue, oh, you are scaring people. Well, I think if they showed their documents, their faces, they would be even more scared people. So I think this is an issue for us that we will not let go of. We need more transparency in the whole process. The second part we heard about earlier this morning is the ISDS, the Investor State Dispute Settlement Mechanism. We just simply have to say no. It is not reasonable that states and taxpayers take all the risks and the big corporations take no risks. That's just not on as a model. The third, which I think we heard about briefly, but which I think we have to dig into a little bit more, is the issue of regulatory cooperation, which is in the pipelines for the TTIP. The Regulatory Cooperation Council that Corporate Europe Observatory spoke about. We need to dig into that, make our arguments sharp, because I think this is part of the new model again, a new architecture which we cannot point at Vattenfall that has sued Germany for wanting to stop nuclear energy. It's actually a new kind of mechanism that is very threatening to our standards and to democracy. The fourth issue I just want to raise, and it's been shown here from our colleagues from Germany and from Austria and others, is how important it is that this agreement, as well as the TTIP and the CETA, becomes mixed agreement. That is, that they are decided, but not only in the European Parliament here, that we push yes or no button, but that it's also taken home to the national parliaments, because that is where citizens can be closer to the discussions, closer to the debate, and it's a process that will ensure much more transparency. So that is also a fight we have to take, and it is ultimately the Council that decides. So it's your member states that will have to walk in the Council and say this is clearly a mixed agreement. So those were just a few of the things that I picked up from this half day we've spent. Some workshops are continuing this afternoon, but for those of you who will not participate in those, I will just say that I endorse totally Susan George's Dracula vampire strategy. I think we can reject this if we make it visible, if we come up with an analysis and our actions on the different parts of the TTIP and the CETA. It will be shown that, as somebody here said, we are a majority when it comes to the public and to people in Europe and in the US and Canada. So I have no doubt about this. We have everything to win to democratize the process around the trade negotiations. The big corporations have everything to lose. We have a lot of work and shouldering up to this responsibility. And when it comes to the left, that is organizing here today, this seminar, we are a partner of this movement and of the mobilization ahead, but we know also that this mobilization has to be so much bigger than only in our voters' base, let's say. And we are committed to work with all organizations and political parties that want to engage in these mobilizations against this new model of trade agreements that do not serve citizens and the planet. So I would conclude to repeat what other speakers said. It is the kind of planet and the kind of society we want to live in that is at stake, and I know we have a big strong basis to carry this work forward. The left is certainly in there, but I know it is much broader than that. So thank you for today. I have a few housekeeping rules to go through after, but I will want to thank my colleagues from the GUNGL for organizing this. I want to thank all the fantastic speakers
for their contributions, for their work on this issue, and I thank the interpreters for making this possible for us to meet together today. Housekeeping very soon. Okay, so I go over to the workshops. I will just actually say that for those that will not have time to go to go and eat, there will be sandwiches. So you just take sandwiches outside. You're also all invited to the Juncker's birthday party at 1 o'clock. For those who want to walk up together to Rond Point Schumann. At 1 o'clock, we just follow Mr. Effler to deliver the European Citizen Initiative signatures against the TTIP and CETA. And I also then will read about the workshops, so bear with me. The European Citizens Initiative and 2015 Action Day. Take your pens now if you have signed up for this workshop. It's in European Parliament 3M004. Parliamentarians networking with social movements on TTIP, CETA, TISA is in European Parliament 5C003. In defence of public services, it's in the European Parliament 2M004. TTIP on CETA TTIP on agriculture, health and environmental issues is in a restaurant, actually a cafe, called Horloge du Sud, 141 Rue du Trône. I will come back to that. TTIP CETA jobs and wages. It's in European Parliament 2M003. Financial services in trade deals. It's in Square de Meuse, just up the street from here, Square de Meuse 40. Digital rights and data protection is also in Square de Meuse 3148. And regulatory cooperation is in the Aloft Hall. It's Place Jean Rey. It's also close to here. But we have Paul Emile in the room. Where is Paul Emile? He has a list of the venues for the workshops, so you don't have to worry. Sandwiches outside, and do join us for Juncker's birthday party at 1 o'clock. Thank you, everybody.